You'll lead us in the pledge, Massey. Subcommittee will come to order without objection. The chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We welcome everyone to today's hearing on government censorship. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. Can we include that the White House put pressure on us to censor the lab leak theory? That's the question Mark Zuckerberg asked in a group text with the top people at Facebook. That's the question he posed to Sheryl Sandberg, Nick Clegg, Joel Kaplan, the top people at Facebook on July 16th, 2021. Now, what prompted this group text? What prompted him to ask that question about the White House putting pressure on Facebook to censor the lab leak theory? Earlier that day, President Biden said Facebook is killing people. That's what got him talking. That's what got him texting. That's what got him asking, can we put out this statement that the White House has been putting pressure on us to censor the lab leak theory? Ms. Sandberg responded in that text message. She said, they're scapegoating us. Mr. Zuckerberg further countered or further stated, Facebook had been combating misinformation just like the White House wanted, but now there's this coordinated attack by the White House against us. Now think about it. Facebook, Mr. Zuckerberg was saying Facebook was doing exactly what the White House wanted, but it still wasn't good enough. Now, we should back up a few months. Senior White House officials, in particular the two guys testifying here today, Mr. Flaherty and Mr. Slavitt, had regular phone calls and meetings with Facebook officials. One March meeting, Mr. Flaherty said, and this is again from the internal communications we got when we subpoenaed Facebook, Mr. Flaherty said, my bias is to kick people off the platform. White House is telling a social media platform, one of the biggest ones in the world, you should kick people off your platform if they're saying things we don't like. In another one, Mr. Flaherty says he can, quote, can you change the algorithm so Americans don't see news from outlets like the Daily Wire? Telling a company, the government, the White House, telling a company, change your algorithm so Americans don't see news outlets like the conservative Daily Wire. Now, Mr. Slavitt didn't want to be left out. He also got in on the censorship effort. He told Nick Clegg he was outraged that Facebook did not remove a meme. This one right here, did not remove a meme. What's interesting is Mr. Clegg countered that, quote, let me just read this quote. I think this is amazing. Mr. Clegg, British member of parliament who works at Facebook, I countered that removing content like that would represent a significant incursion into traditional boundaries of free expression in the United States, an incursion into traditional boundaries of free expression in the United States. Think about it. You got the British guy telling the American guy how the First Amendment works. And it's not just any British guy. It's the British guy who's a member of the British Parliament telling the American guy who works for the President of the United States, this is an incursion into the First Amendment, into free expression. Now, it wasn't just Facebook. It wasn't just Facebook. On day 3, the White House sent an email to Twitter. Ms. Clark Humphrey sent the email. We've talked about this one before. This email said, January 23rd, 2021, third day of the Biden administration. Email goes to Twitter. Hey, folks, wanted to flag the below tweet, and I'm wondering if we can get moving on the process for having it removed ASAP. Next sentence. And then if we can keep an eye out for tweets that fall in this same genre, that would be great. White House, third day of the administration, telling Twitter, take down this tweet as soon as possible, and any other tweets like it, make sure you're taking them down too. That's probably censorship at its worst. And oh, by the way, the tweet was from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Guy turned out to be the White House's opponent in the primary election. And all Robert F. Kennedy said is, Hank Aaron's tragic death is part of a wave of suspicious deaths among elderly closely following administration of COVID vaccines. He received the Moderna vaccine on January 5th to inspire other Black Americans to get the vaccine. 2 sentences, both true, and the White House is saying take it down as soon as possible from the guy who was going to run for the office they're in. So it wasn't just Facebook, it was Twitter, and they didn't stop there. YouTube as well. Let me just read another one. Again, all these are internal communications that we got, or communications we got from the social media companies, but this one sent to Mr. Flaherty. Hi, Rob. Our YouTube Trust and Safety team is working to finalize a new policy to remove content that could mislead people on the safety and efficacy of vaccines. We would like to preview our policy proposal for you and get any feedback you may have. Preview our policy proposal and get feedback. They're asking permission. It's gotten so bad. They're saying, hey, White House, is it okay if we do this? Will your censorship efforts allow us to have this kind of policy? Our other witness, Mr. Zwicky, he was censored by YouTube. Maybe you can blame the guys right beside you, Mr. Zwicky. They're the reason you got censored, probably. I mean, go figure. Now, here's the real kicker. The Biden White House didn't stop with social media companies. They censored books as well. So it was Facebook, it was Twitter, it was YouTube, and also Amazon. And this is from an internal Amazon communication where they say, I submitted a new do not promote class for anti-vax books. The impetus for this request is criticism from the Biden administration about books we're giving prominent placement to and should be handled urgently. So, it wasn't just social media, it was books. Books as well, this virtual book banning that they were involved in. And if you disagreed with them, your social media company, your book, your Amazon, you get censored, they come after you. Maybe the most important point, when you violate the First Amendment, public debate gets distorted. And when that happens, you get bad policy. You don't have the full debate. You don't hear. That's why we have the First Amendment. Some speech may be wrong, you may not like it, but more speech is the answer, not taking down speech. Policies get put in place when you censor and you restrict the First Amendment. Policies that kept Americans from going to church, from going to school, from going to work. Policies that forced Americans to choose between taking a vaccine or losing their job. All that happened, I think, in part because this effort, to restrict the First Amendment in speech. And I guess maybe the final thing I would point out is, what does the Biden administration have up their sleeve in these last 6 months before the election? What are they going to try to censor now? We know the meetings have resumed. The Foreign Influence Task Force meetings with big tech, we know those have resumed. What are they up to now that's going to try to restrict speech and keep information, important information, from the American people? With that, I would yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone that's with us today. While today is only our 9th hearing in this select committee, which I note opened with much fanfare from my colleagues on the right, it's the 6th hearing, like a Groundhog Day, for the same supposed weaponization of social media through the curious case of the so-called Twitter files, Facebook files, social media files, however we want to couch it. The idea that the FBI and the Biden administration have stopped social media companies from free speech. At first I thought, when I heard this at the beginning, it's just my poor colleagues doing the bidding of Elon Musk, who's no fan of American democracy or the great diversity of this country. Is that what's going on here? What's really up their sleeve? It eventually came to light, though, that this is about the continual projection that the Republicans engage in themselves. This is about them intimidating social media companies to stop engaging in reviewing and moderating content before the 2024 election. And it's working. Media, and particularly social media executives and professionals, have been targeted, harassed, intimidated by this committee and the many hordes that follow behind them on Twitter and other places. And they're afraid to do their job. They're afraid to speak up. They're afraid to do their work on those very same platforms. That's well done. Well done. And guess what? You know how we did this? We did this by spending $20 million. Yes, that's how much this committee has spent to have 9 hearings, 6 of which are repeat hearings. $20 million. My fiscally conservative, budget-conscious, don't grow the government coffers friends have spent $20 million to have 9 hearings, 6 of which are about the very same subject. Now, what's even more interesting is I love when people give you half a sentence and then don't respond with what the answer is. And they've been doing this repeatedly, and you're gonna hear this throughout this hearing. For example, that first, what was up on the board there, can we include that the White House put pressure on us to censor the lab leak theory? That looks like a question that he's asking his executives, Mark Zuckerberg. What about the answer? The answer was, I don't think that they put specific pressure on that theory. That's the answer. So the answer was no. But he doesn't want to show you that part because that doesn't help the argument that he's making. The other one that he did, where he says, that's a question. Luke, were you asking if there were threats, like if you don't do what we want, a content moderation, we're going to sick Lena Khan on you, or we're going to go after? And Nick, maybe you could answer just the subsequent question. The answer is, we were never sort of threatened with any. That's the answer. And you're gonna hear this repeatedly. That's the answer. They weren't threatened. They were informed, they were asked, they were questioned, things were pointed out to them, but the social media content people did what they wanted to do. That's how a private enterprise works. What's gonna happen now is, I'm gonna give you a preview of what's gonna happen in this hearing, because I've been sitting in this chair for a while, and I think I kinda know the Groundhog Day and how it goes. Up at the top row, we're going to get a poster with a tweet supposedly demonstrating how a member got labeled by social media company as sharing potentially misinformation on COVID. That's gonna happen. Then somewhere else down the line, We're going to hear about censorship in another country like Canada and how we as Americans need to be afraid of that happening here and how we need to make sure that that doesn't happen, and that's why we're having this hearing. Then wait for it, because you know it's coming. We're gonna hear about Hunter's laptop, because you gotta hear about the laptop. You don't have a hearing unless you hear about Hunter's laptop. And you're gonna hear the story about how it was squashed by the FBI and Trump would have won if that had been able to get out in more social media outlets. You're gonna hear that one. And then finally, the final campfire story that you're gonna hear lower down there is about how scary the FBI is. Because now they're going after people that look like them. You're gonna hear that. That's gonna be part of this hearing. So everybody can go, because I've just outlined for you what we're gonna do. Or you can watch the tapes of the 6 other hearings we've done, sometimes with the same witnesses. Thankfully, goodness, we've got some new witnesses here. We did bring back one, because it's the same subject. But I do wanna thank the witnesses today, all of whom are appearing in front of this select committee voluntarily. Then I'd also like to share with you all why we're hearing these witnesses, this twist on the social media spin that's important right now. Why this is so prescient, having this hearing with these witnesses. Republicans are holding this hearing today in a last-ditch effort to influence the Supreme Court opinion in the case of Murphy v. Missouri. That's what's going on right now. During oral arguments in March, 6 justices questioned Republicans' claim that the federal government interactions with social media companies are tantamount to censorship. The Supreme Court is presently working in their chambers, preparing and thinking and contemplating what that decision is going to be. So when the chairman sent a letter to several of the witnesses asking that they testify today, the initial response was, shouldn't we wait until this court's decision? Wouldn't it be bad form to hold this hearing now and use the US Congress to unduly influence the decision? That's exactly what we want to do, is the answer. That's exactly why we're holding this hearing now, because we do want to influence the decision. We do want to use Congress for that. There's no doubt that this is completely inappropriate use of congressional oversight powers, that my colleagues are the biggest projectors ever. You know, they're like the bad boyfriend who tells you that you're the bad person when they're the ones doing the same thing that they're accusing you of. Let's take a step back and remember where we were during this time in 2021 and how, when we think about all of that, think about the projecting they're doing of using this Congress, this body, to weaponize the federal government. This Congress is actually weaponizing against social media companies. So in 2021, President Biden had just assumed office in the wake of a coup attempt that many on the other side still refuse to identify as such. More than 3,000 Americans were dying a day of COVID. 3,000 a day. That's what was happening while all of this is going on that they're discussing. Doctors, nurses, public health authorities were working to roll out a vaccine that the former president, Donald Trump, his administration initiated. Did we forget that part? We forgot warp speed. Remember that? They wanted the vaccine until they weren't in office, and then you don't want the vaccine because it's not your president who's the one who's rolling it out. That was done to stem the tide of deaths in the face of mounting waves of conspiracy theories claiming without evidence that the vaccine was not safe. This is, while I'll repeat it, 3,000 Americans a day were dying from the direct effects of COVID. These conspiracy theories were downright dangerous. The conspiracy theories I'm referring to weren't just, now, you know, and I love her music, Nicki Minaj sharing a story that a friend of her cousin from Trinidad, something bad happened to him in his private parts after he took the vaccine. Remember that one? that the Republican majority has even used our select committee to give a platform to continue Robert Kennedy Jr.'s claim that COVID was purportedly bioengineered in a lab to target Black people, but to spare Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese people. These false claims that target Black people specifically, let me say, playing on the echoes of very real historic medical experimentation on Black people in America that were tantamount to genocide. For those unfamiliar, I'm referring to a moment the Tuskegee studies that the federal government ran from 1932 to 1972 in Alabama, or the centuries of experimentation on Black women because it's believed that we have a higher pain tolerance to be able to endure such experimentation. Robert Kennedy Jr.'s claims directly echoed those centuries past that as well scapegoated Jewish people and held entire communities collectively responsible for illnesses like the Black Plague, often as a precursor for massacres and pogroms. It should be no surprise, it shouldn't surprise anyone that Mr. Slavitt, Mr. Flaherty, and others in the Biden administration were concerned about these types of flagrant misinformation. They were trying to stop a once-in-a-lifetime global pandemic that had already claimed far too many lives. So yes, Mr. Slavitt and Mr. Flaherty talked to technology companies about what they were doing to stop misinformation. This isn't a violation of the First Amendment to do that. It's an example of the Biden administration doing the work that a president has been elected to do, to keep Americans safe, to check on how companies are using their platforms to inform Americans. And lest the majority forget, the government is entitled to speak for itself. It's entitled to inform, persuade, and yes, even to criticize private speakers. If you want to have First Amendment, have it for everybody. Don't just have it for who you want. Just as Justice Kavanaugh noted during the recent oral arguments, and his quote is, "My experience is in the United States in all its manifestations has regularly communications with media to talk about things they don't like or don't want to see or complaining about factual inaccuracies," end of quote. In fact, Mr. Jordan's own staff regularly communicates with the press. He and I communicated with the press about the content of articles, and you know what? We're entitled to do that. The chairman and the majority claimed that Mr. Flaherty and Mr. Slavitt somehow, quote, coerced social media and technology companies into removing content. But this committee, Republican staff, have gathered hundreds of hours of testimony showing that that is simply not the case. Over and over again in those testimonies, you'll see social media company executives told the committee that no matter who identified concerning content, whether it's a member of the general public, members of Congress, the White House employees, the companies evaluated the content against their own internal policies, only took action if the content violated those policies. And over again, social media company executives told the committee in no uncertain terms that no government official ever coerced them into taking action, no government official ever threatened them with any adverse consequences if their companies did not take action, and no government official ever promised them any benefits if they did take action. The committee has heard hours of testimony to that effect, but the majority has consistently rebuked our side, the minority's request that the testimonies be made public. The majority, who has controlled the tapes, likewise declined to provide us with copies of hundreds of hours of video taken during those investigations. That's because they know the evidence shows that their big investigation, their $20 million investigation, is a flop. Just like their impeachment investigation was a flop. Has anyone forgotten that the investigation hinged entirely on a 1023 form that was later determined to be completely fabricated? That's right, the key witness turned out to be passing along what may well have been Russian disinformation. And apparently that's the name of the game now. The extreme MAGA majority has spent its time, not to mention tons of taxpayer dollars, on baseless investigations that have gone nowhere. All of it in an effort to bully tech and media companies into turning a blind eye to right-wing extremist conspiracies that spread across their platforms, even when those theories violate very basic terms of service about deliberate disinformation and promoting violence. They haven't uncovered any quote-unquote weaponization in the federal government. If anything, it's the committee that has been weaponized for a 2024 election. It's no accident, as I said, that we're holding this hearing today as a Supreme Court opinion in Murphy versus Missouri, a case brought on by Republican State's Attorney General, vociferously supported by committee Republicans, so much so that they even have an amicus brief on it. We're having this hearing now. So I say, let's tell the whole truth. The hours of witness testimony showing that there is no there to Republican claims. So with that, I'm going to move to introduce into the record the transcript from the committee's May 16, 2023 interview with an employee of Meta Security Police Policy Division. I'd like to introduce into the record the transcript from the committee's June 20th, 2023 interview with Meta's Vice President for Public Policy, the transcript of the committee's June 21st, 2023 interview with Meta's Head of Security Policy, the transcript from the committee's July 25th, 2023 interview with Meta Misinformation Policy Employee, the transcript from the committee's 2023 interview with Meta Trust and Safety Policy Employee, the transcript from the committee's March 1st, 2024 interview with Meta's President of Global Affairs, the transcript of the committee's May 22nd, 2023 interview with Meta External Affairs Manager, the transcript from the committee's May 23rd, 2023 interview with the former federal partner manager at Meta, the transcript from the committee's May 31st, 2023 interview with Meta Programs and Partnership Team Lead, the transcript from the committee's June 14th, 2023 interview with the Meta Trust and Security Policy Manager, the transcript from the committee's June 27, 2023 interview with the former Public Policy Liaison at Meta, the transcript of the committee's September 19th, 2023 interview with the Security Engineering Manager of Meta, the transcript from the committee's May 23, 2023 interview with the Director of Google's Trust and Safety Organization, the transcript of the committee's June 22nd, 2023 interview with Google Legal Division employee, the transcript from the committee's July 19th, 2023 interview with the employee of Google's Privacy, Security, and Safety Division, the transcript from the committee's May 24th, 2023 interview with Google Trust and Safety Analyst, the transcript from the committee's June 1st, 2023 interview with a former Google Search employee, the transcript of the committee's June 16th, 2023 interview with YouTube employee who worked on external partnerships, transcript from the committee's June 23rd, 2023 interview with Google's Government Affairs and Public Policy organizational employee, the transcript from the committee's June 26, 2023 interview with Google's Information Quality Strategy employee, the transcript from the committee's June 28th, 2023 with a Google Legal Security employee, transcript from the committee's April 10th, 2024 interview with a former Google Global Affairs organizational employee, transcript from the committee's April 25th, 2024 interview with the former Public Policy Manager of YouTube, transcript from the committee's November 1st, 2023 interview with the former Head of Trust and Safety at Twitter, the transcript from the committee's April 16th, 2024 interview with Amazon Public Policy and Community Engagement Division employee, the transcript of the committee's June 6, 2023 interview with the University of Washington Associate Professor Kate Starbird, the transcript from the committee's June 23rd interview with the founder and director of Stanford Internet Observatory at Stanford University, Alexander Stamos, the transcript from the committee's November 21st, November 2nd, 2023 interview with the former employee for the Center for Internet Security.
Object.
Objection being raised. I would just say that we plan to release all these once we've talked to everyone we've interviewed and their counsel to make sure they're comfortable with it. When we get all that clear, we plan on releasing all that and the video as well. Chair now recognizes, without objection,
We're not
all other
but we're not asking them to be released. We're asking them to be recorded. You can enter them into the record and not release them.
And the gentleman objected to that. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. We now introduce today's witnesses. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate your patience for what was maybe the longest opening statement in human history. But we will now start with Mr. Flaherty. Mr. Robert Flaherty, is a former assistant to the president, director of digital strategy at the White House. Mr. Andrew Slavitt is former senior advisor for the Biden administration's COVID-19 response team. Professor Todd Zawicki is the George Mason University Foundation Professor of Law at the George Mason University Antonin Scalia School of Law. Professor Zawicki is also a research fellow at the Law and Economics Center, and Mr. Matthew Seligman is a non-resident fellow of the Constitutional Law Center at Stanford Law School. His research focuses on election law, constitutional law, federal courts, contracts, and private law theory. We welcome our witnesses and thank them for appearing today. We will begin by swearing you in. If you would please rise, raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record show the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Thank you. You may be seated. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. Mr. Flaherty, you may begin.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, and members of the subcommittee, I'm Rob Flaherty, and from January 2021 to June 2023, I served as the director of the White House Office of Digital Strategy. I'm appearing here voluntarily in response to the subcommittee's request for testimony about my interactions with social media companies during my time in government. I'm glad to have this opportunity to explain my role in government and to correct some of the misunderstandings of my and my office's work. I'd like to take a moment to remind the subcommittee of the time and context in which those conversations took place. When the Biden administration began in January 2021, our nation was in the midst of a crisis unlike anything we'd previously experienced. Every week, over 100,000 Americans were being hospitalized and over 20,000 were dying. These numbers aren't just statistics. They're tragedies for millions of families. There were empty chairs at family tables, including my own. My wife's grandfather passed away from COVID on Thanksgiving Day 2020. When President Biden took office, he made clear that his administration's first and foremost task was to fight the pandemic and bring our economy back from the cliff. And that started with getting the country vaccinated. Those vaccines were a monumental achievement. Countless Americans worked day and night to save lives. It's a story of generational American ingenuity. Even though the vaccines were developed in the prior Republican administration by nonpartisan scientists and brought to market by an innovative partnership with the private sector, they somehow became politicized and controversial, and false information was proliferating on social media. Concerns about COVID misinformation did not begin with President Biden's administration. Facebook laid out their plans to, quote, stop the spread of misinformation in April of 2020. This was an issue that platforms claimed they had begun to tackle long before President Biden took office. In that context, I took over the Office of Digital Strategy, a communications arm of the White House. There's no shortage of films or TV shows that show White House communications staff interacting with print and broadcast media to encourage coverage of certain stories and to persuade the press that certain other stories are wrong, misguided, or would otherwise harm the public. Urging media to publish accurate information is nothing new. While social media is a relatively new medium, communications offices have long acted to ensure that media has the most accurate information available and corrects published information that is false or misleading. Social media companies make editorial decisions at the scale of hundreds of millions per second. They decide what content gets shown to whom and in what order. My office encouraged those companies to exercise that editorial discretion to avoid spreading inaccurate information, particularly related to the ongoing pandemic. To be sure, those companies are the ultimate decision makers about what goes on their platform. But that does not mean that communication staff cannot ask or even implore those companies to address misinformation on their platforms. While social media companies have publicly announced content moderation policies concerning COVID misinformation, those policies were often opaque and difficult to understand. Furthermore, despite the platform's misinformation initiatives, social media was still awash in false and misleading claims about COVID and the vaccines when I entered government. I wanted to understand why. Because if I knew where misinformation was gaining traction, I could effectively focus our messaging on countering it. I'd hoped that social media companies would live up to their own rhetoric to alleviate, rather than aggravate, the dire public health challenges facing the nation. But public reporting made us doubt whether the platforms were doing what they claimed. For example, Facebook told me it was too soon to draw conclusions about vaccine hesitancy on its platform. But a few weeks later, the Washington Post published that Facebook had conducted, quote, a vast behind-the-scenes study of doubts expressed by U.S. users on vaccines and found, among other things, that, quote, a small group of users appears to play a big role in pushing skepticism. With lives on the line and confronted by what I believed to be dishonest actors, my tone reflected the urgency of the matter and the stakes at hand. Although Facebook said its policy was to remove false information about vaccine efficacy, the platform was filled with posts falsely claiming the vaccines didn't work. I was deeply concerned that Facebook was exacerbating vaccine hesitancy while telling me they were working hard to address the problem. None of this is to say Facebook or any social media company must do as the White House asks. They don't. While I asked platforms to step up and adhere to their own stated priority of reducing misinformation on their platforms, which would assist in ending the pandemic, the choice was theirs. There were no threats, period. And while the social media companies turned down many of these requests, there were no consequences. Let me repeat that. There were no threats, and there were no consequences. For example, Twitter abandoned all of its prior policies related to COVID misinformation over a year and a half ago while I was still there. That decision was Twitter's to make, and I'm not aware of any adverse actions against Twitter in response to it. That's no surprise. My office never had or claimed any ability to require the platforms to act on misinformation. In closing, I recognize there are many issues around COVID misinformation on which reasonable minds can disagree. When my interactions with social media companies became at times acrimonious, it was not because they disagreed with my perspective. It was because the answers they provided to my questions about misinformation policies and algorithms were incomplete, misleading, or downright wrong. And in 2021, work related to the vaccine was too important to get wrong or unreasonably delay. Every day, more people were being hospitalized and dying of COVID. Some of those lives likely could have been prevented if more people were vaccinated. I'm proud of the administration's work to get people vaccinated and save lives. If you have questions about the interactions I had with social media companies during my time as the Director of Digital Strategy in the White House, I would be happy to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Flaherty. Mr. Slavitt, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Turn your mic on if you would, please.
That would help. Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, members of the Select Subcommittee, I'm here today voluntarily to discuss my work on the COVID response team at the peak of the pandemic. Let me introduce myself and provide a brief statement. I'm Andy Slavitt. Between January 21 and June 9, 2021, I served in the Biden administration as senior advisor to the COVID response team. I've worked in the healthcare industry since the early 1990s as an entrepreneur, a business leader, a regulator, administrator, a CEO, and as an investor. I was asked by the Biden administration to assist in the difficult operational work needed to end the pandemic as quickly and safely as possible. Those first few days on the job are cemented in my mind. When President Biden was inaugurated, over 4,000 Americans were dying that very day from COVID-19. By January 2021, the number of COVID deaths was increasing so rapidly, it had become the #1 cause of death in the United States, nearly 50% higher than heart disease, the next leading cause. Thanks to the work of successive administrations, vaccines had recently become available. In those early months, we procured and assisted in the production of vaccines, sent military troops into the field to help Americans get vaccinated, and coordinated the many moving pieces of a response while providing the public with straightforward and clear information so they could keep themselves safe. As we did, we could see hospitalizations and the death toll begin to meaningfully decline. By June 2021, when I left the administration, more than 300 million doses of the vaccine had been administered to 2/3 of the public had been vaccinated. As a result, the number of COVID deaths were reduced in the 139 days of my tenure by 90%, from 4,000 on day one to 400, the lowest since the pandemic began. By June 2021, COVID-19 had dropped from the top cause of death to the 7th. I understand that the Select Subcommittee is interested in the Biden administration's interactions with social media companies regarding their policies on content moderation and how such conversations comport with the vital American ideals enshrined in the First Amendment. They were entirely consistent. My communication with social media companies consisted of a limited number of conversations, mainly concentrated over the course of a few weeks in the middle of my 4-month tenure. I was guided by 2 principles in my interaction with social media companies. First, any content decisions and judgments about their enforcement are strictly the domain of social media companies. While policies varied, most social media companies during the pandemic adopted standards designed to prevent what they considered to be the most harmful false content from spreading on their sites. Second, where public safety is concerned, having policies was not enough. As you will see today, I questioned social media companies on how those policies were implemented. Look, we are all aware of the issues that social media companies must contend with, from hate speech to sex trafficking, to the sale of illegal drugs like fentanyl, to foreign adversaries attempting to sow terrorism or violence. It is useful for Congress and the executive branch to be able to have an open dialogue on these challenges with social media companies. It was not our job to set or enforce policies on social media companies. It was our job to understand how those policies were implemented and how their decisions would affect the safety of the American public. Despite any concerns I had about the impacts of the COVID misinformation, to my knowledge, no one within the administration ever sought to make decisions for Facebook or any other social media site over their content moderation. Further, we had no intention of coercing social media companies into taking any action, and I never received any indication that our dialogue ever was interpreted that way. Facebook and other social media companies heard our concerns and occasional complaints, and I would like to think they considered them. But I want to be clear that they made their own decisions. Starting even before this administration took office, Facebook reported publicly and told us that they had removed 20 million pieces of COVID content that violated their policies. Finally, I want to add that these conversations were not held in secret. We have spoken publicly about our interactions with Facebook, and they were the subject of a long interview, which I sat for with the New York Times. In closing, I want to thank the Congress for providing resources to successive administrations to fund vaccine development and help Americans through these dark times. By some estimates, these actions in the vaccination program alone saved 3 million American lives. Thank you for your time and your consideration of these perspectives. I would be happy to answer your questions to the best of my ability.
Thank you, Mr. Slavitt. Mr. Zawicki, Professor Zawicki, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, and members of this Select Subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today to tell you about my experiences during COVID, but my experiences, I think, representative of millions of Americans who not only were denied the opportunity to speak freely about COVID policy and issues related to their own health, but millions of others who were denied the opportunity to receive information essential to their health decisions, the health and safety of their families, and important matters like public policy, such as whether schools should be closed, vaccine policy, vaccine passports, and other sorts of things. I got COVID. I was an early adopter in the first week of March 2020, and so had natural immunity. A year later, my university tried to impose a vaccine, did in fact impose a vaccine mandate. I asked them if they would recognize natural immunity. They did not. So I sued them with the help of one of my lawyers who are here today, Representative Hageman. Thank you for your help with that. And we prevailed, and I'm grateful to George Mason for granting me an exemption. But as I dove into these waters, what I discovered quickly was that all of the major news media, pretty much, were part of a cartel to suppress any heterodox opinions about COVID. And so as a result, I became very active on social media, and I discovered a number of doctors, such as the great Dr. Human Norchasm, my immunologist, who was tweeting and the like. And I became a very active participant. I gave lectures, I gave interviews about COVID policy and my case to try to inform the public. What I discovered was that, that there was this system of censorship going on quite clearly. I had been a very active user of Facebook early on, and then somewhere during the period that is under investigation, it became quite clear that my Facebook feed was being shadow banned. Do I know that for sure? No, because there's apparently no way of determining whether or not you're shadow banned on Facebook, but I could tell that my engagement had gone down. As I relate in my testimony, I had two programs removed from YouTube. One was an interview with the Bill Walton Show, not the basketball player, that described my case. And another was a lecture that I gave describing my case and the scientific evidence that underlies it. Both of those were removed from YouTube without explanation. To this day, I don't know what supposedly the medical misinformation was, whether it was something I said or there was somebody else on that tape who said it. Now, for those who were laughing during the ranking member's opening statement, let me tell you, as an academic, as somebody who takes ideas seriously, being libeled as a spreader of medical misinformation is not a joke. Being denied access to information from doctors that is relevant to my health and my family's health is not a joke. This is not a game. This is my life, and this is a life of a lot of other people. What we saw going on during this period was an ongoing demand. Now we've discovered an ongoing demand for immediate and swift action to censor people like me. There was no information provided that I could see in any of the records that have been produced that anything I said was wrong. I document my testimony, all of the things I said and the basis for saying it. Yet people like me were censored by people like them because they did not like what I was saying. And the First Amendment protects not just my right to speak, but my right to receive information that's relevant to my health. That was the seminal case of the Supreme Court in the Virginia pharmacy case, was that was a case about receiving medical information. I have a friend who is a leader in the vaccine injured group, React 19. He was part of a Facebook group. He suffers to this day from chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy, an autoimmune disease brought on by the vaccines, where literally his immune system is eating away at the protective myelin insulation that insulates his nerves all over his body. He joined a Facebook group for other people who were suffering like him, who had tens of thousands of people who were injured by the vaccines. That group, what did Facebook do with that group? They terminated it with no notice and no explanation. Now, I don't know whether that was done because some sadistic employee at Facebook just decided that they were going to terminate vaccine support groups. Maybe it was because Mr. Slavitt and Mr. Flaherty succeeded with their hectoring of getting Facebook to finally take action against people like my friend and his group. But what I do know is that was wrong, and that was cruel, and I do know that is exactly what Mr. Flaherty and Mr. Slavitt were demanding of Facebook and other social media companies. They wanted to see action, and they wanted to see this sort of information taken down. I appreciate this committee looking into what was going on here, and millions of Americans appreciate the committee getting to the bottom of this and this egregious abuse of power that we saw in suppressing ordinary Americans' free speech rights during the COVID pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Mr. Seligman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, and members of the committee, I thank you for the opportunity to testify today. The Focus of today's hearing is, once again, allegations of censorship by social media platforms purportedly at the behest of the federal government under the direction of the Biden administration. And once again, it bears repeating, the First Amendment applies to governmental restrictions of speech, not private conduct. The plaintiffs in the case now captioned Murthy v. Missouri at the Supreme Court instead argue that the federal government coerced those platforms into censoring disfavored speech through the application of the platform's own content moderation policies. That accusation lacks a reasonable basis in law or, just as importantly, in fact. As I detail in my written testimony, the justices' statements at oral argument indicate that the court will recognize that the social media platforms' decisions to moderate content have always rested with the platforms themselves. There's no evidence in the record, or anywhere else for that matter, indicating that any governmental official ever threatened governmental action of any kind if the platforms did not take action on any particular piece of content. So I'll begin with common ground. All agree that if the government coerces a private social media platform to remove content, that coercion renders the private platform's decision subject to the First Amendment. All agree. The real questions in this case are, first, as a matter of law, what governmental conduct amounts to coercion? And second, do the facts alleged by the plaintiffs in this case amount to such coercion? Based on the oral argument, I believe that the justices recognize and will hold that the allegations here do not. The communications between governmental officials and social media platforms were efforts by the government to provide factual information and, at times, to express the government's perspective on the types of content it believed was appropriate for platforms to promote. That effort of persuasion, even when it used strong language, did not violate the First Amendment. As Justice Scalia once explained, it is the very business of government to favor and disfavor points of view on innumerable subjects. To take one example, the plaintiffs argue that the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency violated the First Amendment by sending messages to platforms flagging content as false, explicitly stating that the agency made no recommendation about what the platform should do about that content, and explicitly stating that the government would take no action at all based on the platform's content moderation decisions. That does not protect free speech. That muzzles the government in its efforts to assist social media companies as they combat the onslaught of misinformation that plague their platforms. Today's hearing will focus on communications between platforms and Mr. Slavitt and Mr. Flaherty. Some of those communications use strong language, but strong language does not convert governmental speech into coercion. As the Deputy Solicitor General explained at oral argument, the First Amendment is not a civility code. And Ranking Member Plaskett quoted Justice Kavanaugh saying that his experience in government is that the government in all its manifestations has regular communications with the media to talk about things they don't like or don't want to see or are complaining about factual inaccuracies. Justice Kagan agreed. She says that this happens literally thousands of times a day in the federal government. The stakes are high. We're fast approaching an election season that promises to be at least as politically polarized as the last. We know from experience that social media is a primary vector of election misinformation. We know that technological advances in artificial intelligence, including deep fakes of candidates and governmental officials, present grave risks to our democratic system. And we know that foreign adversaries will attempt to flood social media platforms with disinformation to sow discord, unrest, and unwarranted doubts about the integrity of our elections. We must not deprive the nation of critical tools it needs to protect itself in the face of these threats. I encourage the committee to hold another hearing after the Supreme Court issues its decision in Murthy v. Missouri by late June, so we can engage in a productive conversation and dialogue about how to address these pressing threats while protecting Americans' First Amendment rights. I welcome the committee's questions.
Thank you, Mr. Seeley. We'll now proceed with 5-minute questions. Mr. Flaherty, when the Biden administration told Americans that the vaccinated couldn't get the virus, were they guessing or lying?
Congressman, I think first of all, it's important to remember my role in this discussion, which is as a communicator on behalf of
You work for the Biden administration, you're assistant to the president. It's a simple question. When they told the American people that if you get the vaccine, you will not get the virus, was that a guess or was that a lie?
Congressman, when we were communicating on behalf of the administration, we were communicating the best information provided by some of the best medical scientists in the world in Atlanta, Bethesda, and beyond. Our role is
let me ask you a simple question. Can the people who got the vaccine, could they still get the virus?
Congressman, again, I'm not here as a medical expert.
No,
I'm
that's
here
just
as a
common,
communicator.
everyone knows that. Of course they can. I'm just asking you a simple question. Well, let me do it this way. What's the definition of misinformation?
Congressman, certainly there's different and varying definitions of mis and disinformation. At the end of the day, the platforms.
Tell me
are
the
ones-
difference. Tell me what misinformation is.
Congressman, these are decisions that the platforms ultimately get to make about how they.
I'm not
define
asking that. I'm a simple question. What's misinformation?
Well, Congressman, I think it's important in the context of these.
How about you,
platforms
Professor?
where-
Can you tell me what misinformation is?
I assume it would be saying something was completely untrue.
Saying something that's untrue, but with no intent. No intent. Disinformation, this is what all the misinformation experts tell us. Misinformation, saying something that's not accurate. Disinformation, saying something that's not accurate with the intent to mislead, right?
That sounds right to me.
You agree, Mr. Seligman? That's the common definition in the misinformation industry out there?
Yes, my understanding.
Okay, that's the definition. So now, Mr. Floyd, how about this question? When the Biden administration told the American people that the vaccinated couldn't get the virus, was it misinformation or disinformation?
Congressman, again, we were communicating the best medical research that we had at the time on behalf of a group of some of the best doctors in the world in Atlanta and Bethesda.
When the Biden administration told the American people that the virus didn't come from a lab, was that misinformation or disinformation?
Congressman, again, I can't speak to discussions that were had on that topic. It's been a couple of years, but again, generally.
The White House put pressure on us to censor the lab leak theory. This was something the White House cared about, so much so that Facebook was having, the top people at Facebook were having a group discussion on it. So I'm just asking, when they said that, was that misinformation or disinformation?
Congressman, I can't recall the specific example.
When the
because I
Biden
believe it was a
administration
Facebook
said that
exchange.
masks work, was that misinformation or disinformation?
Again, Congressman, we were communicating the best research at the time, but I also believe that that was a discussion that began in the previous administration as well.
How about what Professor Zawicki brought up, Mr. Flaherty? When the White House said there was no such thing as natural immunity, was that misinformation or disinformation?
Again, Congressman, I am not a medical expert, and my job was to communicate on behalf of a team of medical experts.
You weren't a medical expert, but you could suggest to Facebook that they needed to change their algorithm so that the American people would not see stuff from the Daily Wire. They'd only see stuff from the New York Times. You can do that, but you can't tell me if they were guessing or lying when they said something that was absolutely not true.
Well, again, Congressman, my role was as a communicator on behalf of the best information available, and the role of the platforms was to have a set of policies that they enforced on their own. And that, my engagement with them had, no bearing on what they're.
No bearing? No bearing?
Well, Congressman, again,
Third
these
day, who's Clark Humphrey?
Clark Humphrey was the digital director for the COVID.
Did you work with her?
Yes, Congressman, I did.
Part of the White House operation in the same area, right? You worked with her?
Congressman, she worked in a similar area.
Yeah, okay. And so when she said on the third day of the Biden administration, wanted to flag the below tweet, wondering if you can get moving on the process for having it removed ASAP. That's not trying to impact what the platforms do. That's not telling the platform what kind of speech can be out there.
Congressman, again, we had the ability to flag whatever we wanted, and the platforms had an ability to say no. I can't speak to whether or not they took any action on the particular.
Well, no, if
social media
they said no,
content
they
in
get
question.
the President of the United States says that Facebook's killing people. They obviously felt the pressure. That's why they're having that group text conversation. How about this one? When the Biden administration told the American people the border is secure, was that misinformation or disinformation?
Congressman, again, I'm here to discuss my engagements with social media platforms.
I'm just asking. You were in the Biden administration when these kind of statements were being made. How about this one? When the Biden administration said the Inflation Reduction Act will actually reduce inflation, was that misinformation or disinformation?
Congressman, again, I'm here to discuss my interactions with social media companies.
Let me go back to the first question in the last 13 seconds. Any chance you'll answer one question for me? When the Biden administration told the American people that the vaccinated couldn't get the virus, were they guessing or lying?
Congressman, we were communicating on behalf of the best medical research that we had available at the time.
All right. I yield. The ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. May I ask that you yield the time to Mr. Connolly?
Oh, yeah,
First.
I can do that with whoever you guys want.
Thank you.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
I thank the chair, and I thank my friend for her graciousness. Got a little problem with my knee this morning. Mr. Flaherty, since you're in the hot seat, when the President of the United States, the previous president, suggested that perhaps the ingestion of bleach might cure COVID, was that misinformation or disinformation? Oh, you,
Congressman,
oh,
I can't speak.
All right, got it. And when he suggested perhaps sources of light in certain orifices of the body might also work, was that misinformation or disinformation?
I believe my understanding is that was medically inaccurate, yeah.
And by the way, did that president get COVID?
Congressman, I recall that he did.
And did he get vaccinated?
Congressman, I believe that he did.
Yeah. Well, I seem to recall the chairman of this committee and I actually got vaccinated, I think I'm right, Mr. Jordan, on the same day. We were in the same clinic here on the Hill when the vaccine first got...
That's not accurate.
Oh, is that not? I thought I saw you.
You might have saw me, but I didn't get vaccinated.
Okay, I'm sorry. Well, at any rate, he was hanging around.
My office is close to where you got vaccinated. But I didn't.
So I want to show some photos from an information slideshow that was presented to social media companies by the CDC to inform these companies of false information. What Professor Zawicki apparently refers to as hectoring by you, Mr. Flaherty, and you, Mr. Slavitt. These slides also included facts provided by the CDC of correct scientific-based information. And I want to take a moment to go through some of these posts that the government identified for social media companies as false information. That hectoring that seems to bother Professor Zawicki. It basically, on the screen, as you can see, there was a theory floating around in social media in the first half of 2021 that said COVID vaccines cause humans to become magnetic. For example, one of these posts states the magnetism from the vaccine reportedly spreads throughout the body over time. And it shows pictures of a person's arm in the middle there with spoons attached to it from the magnetic attraction. Mr. Slavitt, is there any evidence at all that COVID vaccines caused human skin to become magnetic?
No, no, Congressman, not that I'm aware of.
So after I get the vaccine, I don't need to start holding forks and spoons in my arm to see if they stick?
Yeah, nothing that I'm aware of. I think you're okay.
Nothing that you're... And there are, quote, self-reproducing nanoparticles in the vaccines that take over our bodies that cause metal objects to stick to you. That's also false?
Yeah, that was a common internet rumor, but that was not true.
I wouldn't... So what did... You were concerned after, I mean, during COVID, that we best know of, 1.2 million Americans died. Almost everyone in the country got COVID at one point or another. I got it twice. Almost all of us, like you, Mr. Flaherty, lost family members or friends who succumbed to the virus. And I don't know, I have a different interpretation perhaps of your actions, which is you were desperate to get correct information out to protect lives. And we didn't, in the beginning, we didn't know everything we needed to know about COVID. It was a brand new virus, not a lot of studies. We weren't sure what worked and what didn't. We weren't sure about protections. But that's hardly you engaged in a disinformation campaign, nor is it hardly you trying to crack down on the free expression of ideas that can jeopardize lives. Would that be a fair characterization, Mr. Flaherty, of your motivation?
I think that would be a fair characterization, Congressman.
If we can go to another photo real quick. This one says, the magnetic skin condition were emerging daily, and there were verified reports that whoever took the COVID vaccine was going to be magnetic. Mr. Slavitt, was this post accurate?
I don't believe so.
And this one got to Moderna. It actually slandered Moderna vaccine by saying it contained a deadly poison that was not even approved for veterinary use, let alone human use. Many of us got the Moderna vaccine. Has it ever contained ingredients that are fatal or carcinogenic or that cause infertility or nerve, liver, or kidney damage that you know of?
I don't believe so. I think that vaccine has been given hundreds of millions of times in the United States. I'm not aware of it.
I just think it's important that when we use words like disinformation, misinformation, or hectoring of U.S. government officials who are trying to save lives, that we see the other side. There was a real problem. And people lost their lives because they believed that stuff. And it had no basis in scientific fact, and it jeopardized lives in the middle of a pandemic, the worst pandemic in over 100 years. I yield back.
Gentleman's time expired. Yields back. Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stubbe is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Slavitt, how can you honestly say, and I'm quoting from your testimony, and when you said it out loud, I about lost it. And I quote, "Further, we had no intention of coercing social media companies into taking action, and I never received any indication that our dialogue was ever interpreted that way." What exactly was your intent? Why all these emails? I mean, the chairman was just talking about vaccine misinformation that you guys were involved in. There's a litany list, and I'll go through all these Amazon emails. What was your intent if your intent wasn't to coerce? And in fact, Amazon themselves, in an internal document that we have on an email on March 12th, 2021 at 14:47, Friday at Ty Rogers, and the other ones are blacked out, feeling pressure from the White House. Are you a medical doctor?
No,
And you, Mr. Flaherty, testified that you're not a medical expert, right?
That's correct.
You're not a doctor. Any
Correct.
scientific training at all?
That's correct, no.
Ever engaged in advanced scientific research or vaccine development?
Myself, no, I did not, but again.
Did you, Mr.
Congressman,
Slavitt?
no.
Okay. So while serving as senior officials at the White House, both of you engage in lengthy and often hostile discussions with social media companies about your opinion of disinformation related to the pandemic. Despite your lack of what you just testified under oath of medical training or scientific research experience, you both sought to restrict the free flow of information and opinions you deemed as disinformation. Demanded that these online forums restrict the reach of your opinions you disfavored through changes to algorithms, internal content policies, and simply taking down posts in violation of Americans' First Amendment rights. Unfortunately, many of these social media companies caved to your pressure campaigns despite your lie to the American people today in this committee that you had no intent of coercing them. You absolutely did, and that was absolutely your intent, because what other reason would you waste all this time communicating with Amazon and Facebook and Twitter to get them to take down stuff? In fact, simple things like books. So you guys had a busy day on March 2nd in the White House. March 2nd, 2021, you guys were emailed. We'll start with you, Mr. Slavitt. You emailed from you to Zach Butterworth, Flattery, you were on the email, talking about a specific book, and this is just one of many examples that you flagged for Amazon. Anyone who tells you vaccines are safe and effective is lying. So here's the email that you sent on that date. After that, you guys started emailing Amazon, and then on the same day at 6:16 p.m., so the email started at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's now 6:16 p.m., Mr. Flattery, then you're emailing Amazon saying, let's talk about what your policies are. We want to understand what lines are here. My colleague Orr can help find us a time. So that was on March 2nd, despite the fact that you don't want to coerce social media companies, even though you're under oath, and that is what your testimony says. Then on March 12th, Amazon says in an internal email about the discussion in the phone call that you had, and I quote, this is on an email, 12 March 2021, 1447. Ty Rogers is on this, other people from Amazon, and it's an internal email that says, PP is feeling pressure from the White House task force on this issue as well as it relates to banning books. Then there's another internal email on April 20th, so just laying this out. March 2nd, you guys have a busy day identifying books that you want banned on Amazon. Then you have organized a call with Amazon on the 2nd later in the day. And then on the 12th, it looks like you had that call because then there's internal emails from Amazon about the pressure that they're receiving from the White House. And then just a month later, here's another email from Amazon, and I quote, this is Wednesday, April 20th, 2022. There may be parallels in the transgender book debates here. Even if we disclose that we have removed 1,500 books. So because of your coercion campaign, despite the fact under oath of your saying that you didn't intend to coerce them, they took 1,500 books off Amazon. So it's like the American people are smarter than what you think you can just say that you didn't coerce them. They're smarter than that. They realize that that's a complete and outright lie to the American people because they have all of this information now thanks to the great work of this committee and the chairman of getting actual email correspondence and records of phone conversations of you talking to people at Amazon, people at Facebook, people at Twitter to take down not just books and then our testimony here from another witness of him on Facebook. All of this work that you did was clearly intended to coerce the social media companies to act in a certain manner. And to testify otherwise is a complete and outright lie to the American people. Here's another internal Amazon email. Is the Biden admin asking us to remove books, or are they more concerned about search results or order? That's an email between Amazon employees on March 9th, all during this kind of monthly time frame where all this was going on. High levels of propaganda. This is another email from you on that same day. Man, that was a busy day at the White House for emails. March 2nd, 2021, Slavitt emailed Amazon's Vice President of Public Policy asking who to the White House could talk about the, quote, high levels of propaganda and misinformation and disinformation on Amazon's online bookstores. A month later, they banned 1,500 books. So to testify under oath that you didn't intend to coerce these social media companies to act in a certain manner favorable to your political position is an outright lie to the American people. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Chair, I'd ask unanimous consent to enter into the record excerpt from the committee's April 16, 2024 interview with the Amazon employee who received the email that's been discussed, in which the employee explains that Amazon did not take down any content and that they had been working on policies regarding vaccine-related books.
Chairman, I
on
object. That's not a
Amazon.
unanimous consent to
Can you please
insert.
let me finish
No, you're not allowed
my
to
statement?
Mr. Chairman, you're not allowed
Have
to
some
testify
respect.
on a
You
unanimous
guys have been
consent.
talking over me all morning, and I'm getting a little tired of it now.
Mr. Chairman,
Can we
I
have some
object and I ask you to
respect
rule.
for one another here?
Mr. Chairman,
There's
I
been an
object.
objection. There's been an
For
objection.
I object to unanimous
vaccine-related books on
consent.
Amazon for weeks before the Slavitt email.
The unanimous consent is objected to.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move that what the gentlelady is trying to insert into the record
Yes.
be allowed to be inserted into the record, and I
Move-
call
move
for
to
a
table.
recorded vote.
Second,
objection.
ma-
There's been an
second the motion.
Move the table.
Objection. We're in 5-minute questions. Who's
I'm asking
Chair
for a second
recognizes
of that
the ranking
motion.
member for 5 minutes of questioning.
I'm not using my
Chairman.
5 minutes of question. I'm talking about this motion at this time. And you said that there was an objection to the motion. I move that there be a roll call
There's
on the
no,
motion.
there's no valid motion been made.
point of
You
order.
asked for unanimous consent. There was
And
an
then I
objection.
said, Ms.
was an
Sanchez
objection.
moved a motion.
It was
which
Ms.
I'm
Wasserman
sorry,
Schultz.
Ms. Wasserman Schultz had a
motion was
motion
made.
which I seconded.
On a point of order, Mr. Chairman. Point of order.
I did ask for unanimous consent, and when that was objected to, Ms. Wasserman Schultz made a motion which I seconded.
And the motion is to enter it into the record?
Yes,
Yes.
it is.
Okay. Gentlelady's made a motion.
On
Gentleman from
on a
Florida
point
moves
of
to
order on
table.
the motion.
There's been a motion to table. All those in favor of
I
the
know,
table
but
will
sir,
say aye.
Mr.
On a
Chair.
point of order.
Aye. Those opposed,
Mr.
no.
Chair, there is a point of order. You can
been
hold that request.
outstanding for about
An
5 minutes now.
outstanding point of order that you as the chair need to
Gentleman will say his
address.
point of order.
Okay, so this hearing is
That's
set
not a
up-
valid point of order.
You haven't even heard him
been a-
finish his
this hearing-
sentence.
Because
This
a point of
hearing
order
is-
has to start with a reference to the section and the order. You can't just start talking.
No,
There's been a
no.
motion to table.
Mr. Chairman,
The
this
question is
Are
on
you
the
going to
motion
do
to
this?
table.
You're going to do this for the rest of this
ridiculous.
year? You're going to
No, I'm not
operate
going to
this
do
way
that. I'm
with
going
your
to follow the
colleagues?
rules of the committee.
You don't
Motion to
follow the
table.
the
All
rules
those
of the
in
committee when
favor
it's
of
your
tabling the
colleagues
motion
over
from the
there.
gentlelady
You're
from
going
Wa-
to treat
from
us
Florida
this
will
way?
say aye.
Is that how
Aye.
we're going to do this?
Those opposed?
Is that how we're going to
No.
do this for the rest of the year?
Mr. Chairman, I ask
You
for a
have no
recorded vote.
respect for your colleagues. This
Mr.
is
Chairman,
ridiculous.
I ask for a recorded vote on the motion to table.
Well, hang on one second. I haven't even said, according to I think
After
the
you
ayes
rule.
had it. The gentlelady has asked for a recorded vote. Clerk will have the clerk come out and call the roll.
Mr. Jordan.
And are you going to address the point of order that's still outstanding?
There's a vote been called, right? So
Yes.
if we're gonna operate,
Vote is on the motion to table.
right.
Mr. Jordan. Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Issa. Mr. Issa votes aye. Mr. Massey. Ms. Stefanik. Mr. Gates. Mr. Gates votes aye. Mr. Armstrong. Mr. Stube. Mr. Stube votes yes. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop votes yes. Ms. Kamak. Ms. Kamak votes aye. Ms. Hageman. Ms. Hageman votes yes. Mr. Davidson. Mr. Davidson votes aye. Mr. Fry. Mr. Fry votes aye. Ms. Plaskett.
No.
Ms. Plaskett votes no. Mr. Lynch. No. Mr. Lynch votes no. Ms. Sanchez.
Hell no.
Ms. Sanchez votes no. Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
The irony of not allowing introduction of information into the record, which is a typical action for on a
Objection.
hearing that is based on
Objection, Chairman, there's
their
a roll call.
objection to information being squelched is not lost on me, and I vote no.
Ms. Wasserman Schultz votes no. Mr. Connolly? Mr. Garamendi?
I understand we're trying to suppress information. Yes. After all that was said previously about witnesses, now this committee is suppressing information.
Turn your mic on.
I'm trying to understand, the question before us is, the committee wants to suppress information. Oh, table information, so that we don't have the information available to us. Or the public, and we've gone round and round berating. the
Gentlemen wish to be
witnesses about
recorded on the vote or not?
I'm at a loss to understand, Mr. Chairman, what in the world you're doing.
No, it's a
Mr.
yes or
Chairman.
no question. It seems like you're at the loss to know what you're supposed to do here, to vote, yes or no?
Oh, in other words, to be obedient to you.
No, yes or no, you can vote either way you want.
Well,
Mr.
I
Chairman,
think
it's
I'll vote no.
a dilatory tactic, and the vote should, roll call should continue. The clerk should be instructed to continue calling the roll if the gentleman doesn't wish to record.
Ms. Garcia?
Oh, once again, suppressing information.
No, we're just waiting for an answer. If you won't give it to us, we're going to move on.
Procedure.
Ms. Garcia?
Garamendi votes no.
Mr. Garamendi votes no. Ms. Garcia?
Well, I talk about coercion. I vote no.
Ms. Garcia votes no. Mr. Goldman?
No.
Mr. Goldman votes no. Ms. Crockett? No. Ms. Crockett votes no. Mr. Armstrong? Yes. Mr. Armstrong votes yes.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 10 ayes and 8 noes.
Motion is table. The chair now recognizes for 5 minutes of questioning the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that we've referred to several quotes by Mark Zuckerberg already this morning. One of his famous lines is, the question, this is Mark Zuckerberg, the question that I ask myself every day is, quote, is this the most important thing I could be doing? And I think this committee should ask itself the same question. You know, when we opened this select committee, subcommittee on so-called weaponization of the federal government, we had great fanfare. This room was packed. This room was packed. We had all kinds of news cameras and extra security, jam-packed, reporters, a line out the door. Those extra tables that you see on the side there, the 60 or so extra chairs are for the press that didn't show up today. And even half of the Republican members didn't show up until we had a roll call. We should ask ourselves, is this the most important thing we could be doing today? Mr. Seligman, I want to ask you about election denial and its impact on the integrity of our electoral system. What is the impact of President Trump and Chairman Jordan's lies that the election was stolen? What is the impact of that on the integrity of our electoral process?
Well, there have been pervasive impacts, the most dramatic of which, obviously, were the tragic events of January 6, 2021, but the impacts have persisted. One of the things that I'm most worried about is that election workers throughout the country have been subject to threats and intimidation. And one of the consequences of that is that these election officials, both elected officials and civil servants, have been leaving service, and that leaves the election administration system in the United States dangerously understaffed with experienced election workers. And there is a direct tie between the threats that these election workers have experienced, their decisions to leave, and the misinformation about the 2020 election. There's a direct link there.
So we had more than 60 state and federal lawsuits brought by President Trump and Rudy Giuliani and other associates, which all failed. All of those cases failed, primarily because they lacked evidence. From the state court to the Supreme Court, judges from across the political spectrum have reviewed those rigged election claims made by Chairman Jordan and made by Donald Trump, and outright rejected those. In one opinion, a Trump-appointed federal judge, Stefanos Bibas, wrote, quote, "Calling an election unfair does not make it so. Charges require specific allegations and then evidence, and we have neither here," and close quote. And again, in throwing out Rudy Giuliani's attempt to discard millions of legally cast votes in Pennsylvania, federal district court judge and former state Republican Party official Matthew Brand ruled that, quote, "This court has been presented with strained legal arguments without merit and speculative accusations unsupported by evidence." He also found the case made by Giuliani to have been haphazardly stitched together like a Frankenstein's monster, close quote. Mr. Seligman, what steps can we take to curb disinformation and return the American people to a shared reality about our electoral process?
Well, I think both government and media, including social media platforms, have a role to play here. So one of the most important governmental roles to play here is to provide accurate information. And so the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency plays an enormously important role in doing so. It provides information to the public and to media organizations, including social media platforms, about accurate information in order to counteract misinformation. It also, at times, flags misinformation, false information about the mechanics of voting, who's eligible to vote, on what day they may vote, the manner they may vote. Is it by mail or is it by text message? And so this is a governmental function that is indisputably consistent with the First Amendment and is critically important to the integrity of our elections. Now, the private sector also has an important
I need to reclaim my time, sir. I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you for your answer. Mr. Chairman, we have 38 transcripts of witnesses that have been hauled before this committee and had to testify under oath in response to claims of censorship of the media. I moved to have these 38 transcripts placed on the record. Whether or not they are disclosed or made available to the public is another question for the committee, but I ask that these 38 transcripts be admitted into the record.
Move to table.
A motion to table the motion made by the gentleman from Massachusetts. All those in favor of the tabling motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote being requested. The clerk will call the roll.
This is outrageous. We're not able to put anything into the record now? Are you kidding me?
Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Issa?
Yes.
Mr. Issa votes yes. Mr. Massey?
Yes.
Mr. Massey votes yes. Ms. Stefanik? Mr. Gates? Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Stube? Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes yes. Ms. Kamek? Ms. Kamek votes aye. Ms. Hageman? Yes. Ms. Hageman votes yes. Mr. Davidson? Mr. Davidson votes aye. Mr. Fry? Aye. Mr. Fry votes aye. Ms. Plaskett?
Talk about censorship. No.
Ms. Plaskett votes no. Mr. Lynch?
This is a hearing of censorship by the media. These transcripts are transcripts of media officials who were hauled before the committee.
Question.
I vote no.
Mr. Lynch votes no. Ms. Sanchez?
If you're not afraid of what's in the transcripts, I don't understand why they can't be entered into the record, and my vote is no.
Ms. Sanchez votes no. Ms. Wasserman Schultz?
20 years of committee hearings in Congress, I've never seen a denial of being allowed to insert information into the record, ever. Mr. Chairman, you have to fix this. This cannot be how we proceed going forward, and I vote no.
Ms. Wasserman Schultz votes no. Mr. Connolly? Mr. Garamendi?
Why are we censoring the information?
We're not. We will release the transcripts when we've talked to the person who was deposed, and when we've talked with their counsel and they're comfortable with the transcripts, we plan on releasing them all.
The transcripts have been available since last April, Mr. Chairman. Last April. It's been over a year.
And we're working on that. We're working on that. The question is to Mr. Garamendi, how does he vote on the motion to table?
No.
Mr. Garamendi votes no. Ms. Garcia?
No.
Ms. Garcia votes no. Mr. Goldman?
Speech is free as long as I agree. No.
Mr. Goldman votes no. Ms. Crockett?
That was poetic. No.
Ms. Crockett votes no. Mr. Gates votes aye. Mr. Armstrong votes yes.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 10 ayes and 8 noes.
The motion is tabled. The
Mr. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent that items asked for.
Object.
Object.
I'm asking unanimous consent.
Objection has already been made.
I have to get to you knowing what it is before you.
We don't, we don't get to explain what we're
That the
asking.
material previously asked for by unanimous
Objection.
consent, to the extent that it does not violate the rules of the committee, be admitted. If you want to object to your own information being put in, go ahead. Is there an objection?
It's the committee's information, it's not our own.
Conditions that we don't want to admit it with conditions.
And who
Okay,
determined, who
the
determines
Democrats
that?
have objected to the unanimous consent request. I now recognize the gentleman from California for 5 minutes of question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I share with my gentlelady on the other side of the aisle. I have never seen a unanimous consent for appropriate outside information to be objected to, and I don't believe it was here today.
You're the one that made the objection.
I made the objection
did
for
it yourself.
material previously not released, which is pursuant to the committee to be released by agreement with the chairman. Having said that, I came here for a hearing. Mr. Flaherty, where did you work during your time in the administration?
Congressman, sorry, can you
What
clarify?
building?
For a portion, I was in the EEOB, and for a portion, I was in the West Wing.
You were in the White House for your entire time. The EEOB is considered the White House, correct?
Yes, sorry, I apologize.
Mr. Slavitt, same thing there? You worked in the White House?
Yes.
Okay. When you had conversations with YouTube or with Facebook, did they believe they were talking to somebody in the White House?
Congressman, my understanding would be that they would understand the
You'd say you're calling from the White House, you're calling on behalf of the president, that's the role that each of you had. Mr. Zawinski, would you agree that when you say you're calling from the White House, that is inherently a statement of amazingly high power? Any doubt about that?
I have no doubt about that.
When you're a few feet from, as Mr. Flaherty was, a few feet from the Oval Office, are you a few feet away from literally the center of power of the world?
Yes, I would say so.
So when Mr. Seligman said, the court's going to rule, he was saying because you'd failed to show potentially a level of intimidation or use of power. Is that correct? And that's somewhat what he was referring to when the court's comments.
Yes, that seems to have been the thrust of his
Well,
comments.
so for our audience here today, the world, is there any question you say that you're calling from the White House, that you're calling from a place of immense power, whether you're a doctor, you know anything about vaccines or not, but you're questioning whether a publicly traded company should be doing what it's doing, that there is inherently a level of potential coercion?
I cannot imagine a single American other than people sitting at this table or taking their side who would not recognize what it means to get a call from the White House.
Mr. Flaherty, in my time, I've gotten a couple of calls, from the White House, and it generally causes me to panic, even if it's my own party. I've gotten calls where someone recognizes they're from the FBI, and it causes me to begin moving every possible scenario before I find out what it's all about. Did you have any doubt that you were speaking with a level of authority when you made suggestions or questioned things?
Congressman, I can't speak to how.
Oh, come on. You're a smart guy. You said you were from the White House. You're speaking on behalf of the administration. Did you have any doubt that what you said might be seen as more than a passing suggestion?
Well, Congressman, first of all, the White House definitely has a vested interest in public health and the health
Okay, well, let me ask it a different way. When YouTube offers to change their policy and ultimately does change their policy, did you see a cause and effect that you might have had something to do with an entity literally changing how it stifles what gets on to its platform?
Congressman, I don't recall specifics
So you
of them.
put out information, but you don't ingest any of the results, is what you're telling us here today.
Congressman, I can't recall a specific policy change.
Okay, you don't recall, that's fine. Mr. Slavic, I'm going to ask you substantially the same thing. You were calling from the White House. You were calling from the most powerful place pretty much on earth. Did it ever occur to you that a benign suggestion might in fact look like an order that could lead to huge ramifications? It at least crossed your mind that you had to tread softly.
Yeah, Mr. Congressman, I did expect that they would take my call. I did not expect that they would do anything they didn't agree with, and particularly in the course of a pandemic, I hoped that they would take my call seriously since we were talking about a serious matter.
Okay, and I just want to follow up on one thing the chairman got to. He asked it one way, I'll ask it another way. Many of the things that you were causing to be changed, suggesting be changed, turned out not to be true. Is that correct? Such as the getting a vaccine stopping the transmittal of the disease. It just turned out not to be true. Is that a fair statement?
If what you're suggesting is that the facts changed on the ground quite frequently during COVID, I would agree with that.
The facts never changed. The understanding of what the truth was changed.
Well, actually, as we saw new variants, with particularly the Delta variant, some of the things that had occurred before Delta did in fact change because the
Thank you,
facts on the
Mr.
ground
Chairman,
changed.
and I reluctantly yield back, even though Mr. Zawinski had something else to say.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you. You know, it's kind of ironic. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Garamendi.
I'll go to California, whoever you want, but I was told the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If my colleague from California would like to go first? No. Okay. I guess I'm perplexed. I have a line of questions for Mr. Siegelman, but before I get there, my understanding is that the committee staff did a series of interviews under oath with witnesses, 25 witnesses from the various media companies that are being discussed here today. And that of those 25, 12 were from Meta, that's Facebook, 11 from Google, YouTube, 1 from Amazon, 1 from Twitter. And when asked, every single witness confirmed that nobody from the government ever coerced or threatened their respective companies into taking down content. Presumably, those interviews were recorded and in most cases videotaped. It would seem to me important that those recordings and those videos be on the record and available to the committee members and to the public. Because if in fact they do exist, and if in fact I'm correct that every person interviewed said that they were not coerced, then that would seem to be critical information for the content of this hearing. However, it appears as though we may not have those interviews available to us, although I'm not at all sure what the current chair intended with his motion.
Is that a question for the chair?
Did your motion make those interviews available and part of the record?
As long as they were not prohibited by the committee rules on release, anything that is become publicly available would be available. These, of course, that are sitting here at a minimum are available to you at any time. All the transcripts are available. As a matter of fact, we're all invited to be in those interviews.
Are they now a formal part of the hearing record?
At this time, they have not been admitted. The chair explained that, among others, there are at least some that are depositions which require a formal vote in order to release. The others, some of the material has been released, some has not.
If it is correct to say that of those 25 interviews, all of which answered the question of coercion by saying they were not coerced, it would seem to be critical that that information be not only available to the committee, but since the committee chairman and others are accusing the government, the witnesses, and therefore the government at that time of coercion. And those people that received those messages said that they were not coerced. It seemed to be important that that information be not only a formal part of the record, or a part of the formal record, but also be available to the public, since it would seem to counter the fundamental point that the chairman's trying to make, that there was coercion. Am I right or wrong here?
Gentleman yield. I absolutely share with the gentleman that we need to release these as soon as they can be approved by the as valid transcripts. And I share with them that more information rather than less. I would ask that the gentleman remember that when there's an ongoing investigation, whether it's the FBI or this committee, we often do not want to have the information released in its entirety until all individuals have been interviewed, lest there be a circular, I know what the other guy said.
I appreciate that. However, it appears as though the committee is proceeding hell-bent on trying to prove something that is disproved by 25 witnesses. Apparently, the chairman and the committee are trying to prove there was coercion when those people that were, the committee says, were coerced, in their testimony say they were not. Wouldn't it be wise for us, in the context of where we are in the accusation, that there's a counterpoint that is right there on the table, and that should be part of the formal record, should be available to prove or disprove the accusations that the chair is making?
If the gentleman would yield further, what I would say is that the emails that have been released say otherwise, but if the gentleman would like an additional minute for a question of the witnesses, I would be glad to ask that he have that additional minute.
Otherwise, I'm out of time.
Without objection, the gentleman's granted an additional minute.
For all of you, and let's start with Mr. Siegelman, if an accusation has been made of coercion and there is evidence from those who were contacted by the government that they were not coerced, shouldn't that be part of the formal record?
Yes, those are relevant facts.
Anybody disagree with that? So it appears as though the witnesses would say, let the information be out there, make it available to the public, and certainly make it part of the formal record. I suppose my minute is up. I yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. We now go to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Flaherty, as you were putting the heat on social media companies, did you make the decisions which posts were most egregious to highlight or flag, or were there other people telling you which posts to go and express concern about?
Congressman, I'll say in general, we were lifting up examples of content that we felt were violating.
Right, when you say we, I just want to know which human beings were involved in deciding, like, this Leonardo DiCaprio meme had to go.
In general, we were discussing specific pieces of content when we were discussing.
Again, I know you guys love pronouns, but we is not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the names of the people.
Congressman, I'm not authorized to.
Well, you wrote an email on April 21st, 2021. We remain concerned that YouTube is funneling people into vaccine hesitancy. This concern is shared at the highest, and I mean highest, levels of the White House. So we'd like to continue a good faith dialogue here. I'm on the hook for reporting out. Who were you on the hook for reporting out to?
Congressman, I can't recall who specifically I was referencing in that document.
Because you kind of just strike me as a functionary. I don't really think you were making these decisions. I think that these people that you say the highest levels of the White, when you say the highest, and I mean the highest levels of the White House, who are you referring to? Without using the word we.
Congressman, I can't recall specifically who I'm referencing.
Well, when you say are you talking about President Biden?
Congressman, I don't think it should be a surprise that the administration was focused on the issue of presenting authoritative information
about the
vaccine.
I find your testimony terrifying, but incredibly intellectually honest. Because you've come here and you've taken the position, look, you know, in the White House, people are always trying to shape how information is received. They do it with the New York Times, you've seen it on the West Wing, and I think a lot of Americans see a distinction between powerful White House officials trying to shape a news story in the Washington Post and then trying to shape what all of America and the world can see in the digital information space. But you say there's no distinction there, and I think that's honest. It scares the hell out of me, but that seems to be your testimony, right?
Congressman, these platforms are making hundreds of millions of algorithmic editorial decisions a second. And those algorithmic decisions—
I get it. I just don't want the White House participating in them. I get that to have social media companies, there are all these decisions that get made about what content rises and falls. What we have a problem with is when the United States government is putting their thumb on the scale. Now, you said there were no threats and there were no consequences. Was there pressure? Did you put pressure on social media companies?
Congressman, we certainly raised areas where we had questions about their policies or concerns about their enforcement.
Would you categorize that as pressure, yes or no?
Congressman, I can't speak to how they interpreted my conversations.
Well, I can, because there's an email about it. Nick Clegg sends an email. The title is Andy Slavitt Podcast, and he asks people at Facebook, can someone quickly remind me why we are removing, rather than demoting or labeling, claims that COVID is man-made before May? And the reply to that email is, and I quote, because we were under pressure from the administration. We shouldn't have done it. So were you part of that pressure campaign?
Congressman, again, having not seen the document, I can't speak to who they're referencing or what they're referencing. All I can say is—
Well, Mr. Slavitt, were you a part of that pressure campaign?
I don't believe we were applying any undue pressure on social media companies. I don't think they interpreted it that way.
Well, in writing they have. Mr. Chairman, I seek to enter into the record the email where the people at Facebook are saying, okay, well—
Objection.
Fine, it exists, it's it's out there. And Mr. Slavitt, there's another email, which I'm sure the Democrats would object to having considered, where a Facebook employee says, just got off an hour-long call with Andy Slavitt. He was outraged, not too strong a word to describe his reaction, that we did not remove this post, which was the third most highly ranked in the data we sent him. That was a Leonardo DiCaprio meme. That was a joke. Were you guys trying to get jokes removed?
Mr. Congressman, thanks for asking. I'll try to explain, but really briefly. If Facebook, by their own policy, had put something on their website which said 250,000 people are dying every year from the vaccine, that would undoubtedly have violated their policy.
Okay, well, let's go to true information. Hold on, let's go to true information then. Because in another Facebook document, they say, quote, the Surgeon General wants us to remove true information about side effects. Mr. Flaherty, should true information be removed?
Congressman, I can't speak to what they're—
Can't even speak to whether or not we should censor the truth, because they don't like where it leads. I see I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Yields back. The gentlelady from California is recognized, Ms. Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, it has not escaped my notice that there is information that is specifically being excluded from the record because it's inconvenient to the narrative that one side is trying to sell. They're trying to say that there was all this coercion and that the government was forcing people to do things when the witness testimony is contained in the transcripts that you will not allow to be entered into the record. Mr. Flaherty was asked about the emails, and he said, I can't testify as to how the emails were interpreted, but the evidence of how they were interpreted are in the transcripts that you won't allow into the record. Why will you not allow the witness testimony? These are all the people that received the email, because you want to pick and choose certain things that were said and not allow the full context in which they were stated to be entered into the record, which I think is incredibly disingenuous, and it's misleading, and it's purposefully misleading because you want it to fit the narrative that you are trying to sell. Of course, the government isn't allowed to threaten Americans from engaging in First Amendment rights, but today Republicans are saying that the government can't even express an opinion unless that opinion is one that MAGA adherents agree with, which is completely a ridiculous proposition. There is a difference between expressing an opinion and threatening somebody to believe it. The only threats that I see today are coming from across the aisle against our government's ability to protect its people. Mr. Seligman, the government is entitled to speak for itself, correct?
Correct.
The government is entitled to inform, to persuade, and even to criticize private speakers, correct?
Correct.
So government actors like the White House, they're allowed to express opinions because they have a First Amendment right as well. They can encourage Americans to take steps to protect their health and safety, for example.
Correct.
And isn't it true that throughout our history, presidents have expressed their opinions about the welfare and the safety of the American people?
Yes.
I want to walk through a few examples of the government expressing an opinion or encouraging Americans to take certain actions, because according to the Republicans, those moves are somehow an affront to conservatives. Mr. Seligman, is it a First Amendment violation for the government to encourage healthy young people to serve in the military or to go into some other public service like the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps?
No, it is not.
Is it a First Amendment violation for the government to start an awareness campaign telling adolescents that, they shouldn't eat Tide laundry detergent pods as part of a social media challenge?
No, it is not.
Is it a First Amendment violation for the government to encourage medical professionals to receive training on signs of sex trafficking?
No, it is not.
And the government can share those opinions and encouragements with social media companies, or other companies for that matter, to promote its ideals of wellness and safety. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
So, for example, if the government was aware of content spreading online promoting child sex trafficking, the government could tell Facebook about this content, especially since promoting sex trafficking on these sites is against the company's own policies. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
And the government could flag for YouTube that kids are facing life-threatening complications after watching videos of teens eating Tide detergent pods and deciding to ingest those pods themselves.
That is correct.
Would such conversations between government and private companies constitute coercing these companies to take specific actions?
Not unless any adverse consequences were attached to it.
Okay, and to date, to your knowledge, have any of these companies sued the government for coercion?
Not
or
to
for
my knowledge.
retaliation?
Not to my knowledge.
For failing to do something that the government suggested?
Not to my knowledge.
And the First Amendment also allows members of Congress to speak out about their own opinions, correct?
Correct.
Even if other individuals might find their opinions rude or offensive?
Correct.
And members of Congress frequently exercise that right in things like press interviews, correct?
Correct.
If anyone is trying to silence speech, it's congressional Republicans who are fear-mongering, they're threatening social media companies not to collaborate with the Democratic White House and trying to prevent the White House from saving lives. What we are doing here today, what you are doing here today is dangerous and manipulative. It's trying to convince the American people of falsehoods and conspiracy theories that have no basis in fact. Make no mistake about this one thing, allowing these wild conspiracy theories to spread unchecked is only because you guys are seeking to strengthen Donald Trump's re-election bid. Let's just call it what it is. And with that, I yield back my time.
I thank the chairman, and I thank our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Slavitt, in your book, Preventable, you wrote that, quote, "But even accounting for Trump, other deep-seated issues that are part of our culture and national identity emerge to haunt us. Our obsession with individual liberties, even at the expense of others' lives and health. Is it a bad thing that Americans feel strongly about individual liberties?"
Certainly not.
How then did individual liberties become a barrier to, what are you talking about there?
I didn't suggest that they're a barrier.
What's the trade-off there? You feel like that some liberties should be curtailed?
I feel like, first of all, what I wrote as a private citizen, I want to emphasize, I think that it's important to have dialogues about all these issues, and I think that's what we were attempting to do with social media companies.
You were actively curtailing liberties, which is what you were doing.
No, I don't believe
that. Are you proud of the work that you did?
Certainly. Yes.
Why? What did you accomplish?
Well, by most estimations, 3 million American lives were saved, not just by my work, but by the work of 2 administrations, a bunch of scientists, the military.
And that was because you exerted influence to be able to get what you believe saved those lives out.
Because the country pulled together, I think, in quite a pretty responsible way during a pretty tough time.
No remorse, no regrets over asking social medias to censor Americans?
I'm self-critical, but I never asked social media companies to censor anything.
right, just take it down, or just don't sell the books. We don't really want you to keep selling these books at your store.
No, that's not what I said. With due respect, Mr. Congressman, what I said was, I want to understand how your policies to promote these books, not to sell them, but to put them on the equivalent of the end cap of the aisle and say, these are the most important books to
So
read.
it was
How
okay if they
came
had
with
them
that
somewhere,
policy.
just not online. Be
It's okay.
if they had them in a used bookstore.
It's
Mr.
acceptable for
Flaherty,
them to do whatever they wanted.
Mr. Flaherty, you proud of the work you did?
Yes, Congressman. I am.
Why? Did you feel like you exerted some influence over people?
Congressman, I'm proud of the administration's efforts to save lives and
I didn't ask about the administration, I asked about you. You happy? You feel like you did a good thing?
Congressman, I'm very proud of the work we did in the administration to save lives.
So the means did justify the ends, right? So it was okay that we curtailed freedom because the outcome was desirable.
Congressman, I want to dispute the
Is
characterization
that what the
of
First
our
Amendment
work.
says?
We
Is that what it
certainly
says?
were not censoring, threatening, or providing consequences to companies. We were raising up.
I think the American people will conclude that you were in fact doing that. And I think once we get to share all the transcripts with the public, I think the unredacted versions will make it very clear that's exactly what you were doing, and that's what the social media companies knew you were doing and why they conformed. And recently, the House gave the executive branch, even in the Senate, and now it's a law, we gave the administration, the executive branch, even more authority. Recently, the House voted to ban TikTok. While Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party are a threat, I voted against this ban because I have serious concerns that banning social media platforms is more harmful to free speech in America than to China. We have a White House that is engaging in coercive activity so that they can actively control the narrative on social media and, frankly, on an online bookstore, the most ubiquitous one in the world. This is the same kind of stuff the Chinese Communist Party does, and they heavily regulate media and online speech. I'm extremely worried that a platform ban provides another point of leverage for the executive branch, for government to exercise coercion over private companies to effectively censor Americans and their First Amendment protected right to speech. We will not counter China by becoming more like China, yet that's exactly what we've done with this TikTok Trojan horse. Congress effectively granted a rogue White House the same control over internet activity that the Chinese Communist Party exercises in China. It is a grave mistake, and I hope we correct it, because we can see here today that we already have an administration that tried to launch a disinformation governance board. Were either of you part of those discussions?
I was not part of anything like that, no.
Congressman, I was not
It
part of
was
this.
heavily related to the activity that you guys were engaged in. So when you say we at the very highest levels, would that include President? I mean, the highest level at the White House is President Biden, right?
Congressman, again, it shouldn't surprise anybody that we were, as an administration, focused intently on getting the American public vaccinated. This is a thing that everyone at every level of the administration spoke
But so
to on a
again,
daily
the
basis.
means justify the ends. We can cancel speech and violate it. I think it's a shame that this has happened, and I hope we criminalize it, because you should not be able to violate the First Amendment rights of American citizens and not have consequences for it. My time has expired, and I yield.
Amen.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's breathtaking that now we're suggesting that we arrest people who are trying to make sure that they could save lives and prevent them from dying of a novel virus that killed millions of people. But as we heard today, there is a lawsuit against the U.S. government for allegedly colluding with social media companies to censor conservative speech online, a case that has now reached the Supreme Court. My colleagues across the aisle favor the position that the government must be forbidden from communicating and collaborating with social media companies. Well, I disagree. Holding that opinion is acceptable, yet clearly we're here so Republicans can influence the justices, as the ranking member said, before this upcoming case, and that's what's unacceptable. To wage an inappropriate court influence scheme under the cover of oversight and impugn men who did their job and did it well is not just improper, it's actual weaponization of the federal government. So this begs the question, are we going to be launching an investigation into our own sham subcommittee? Because that's the weaponization of the federal government. Here we are attacking civil servants who work to keep America safe. That's clear based on the chairman's question line that was designed to bully rather than seek actual information directed at a public servant who was communicating the best scientific information available at the time. We all have comms directors. We know they're not experts, they're communicators. Instead of using their public megaphone to suggest people put bleach in their bodies to fight COVID, Mr. Slavitt and Mr. Flaherty clearly tried to save actual lives amid a global pandemic using sound medical and scientific methods. And they did just that. Numerous studies show that millions of lives were saved because of their work. And, we're not hearing one Republican say that today, but it doesn't make it any less true. Another thing we haven't been hearing today is that there are other legitimate interests for government to engage social media companies, and barring such communications could leave us vulnerable if our election systems are attacked, for example. In Florida, voter suppression is a real concern. Citizens in my state overwhelmingly, for example, said in 2018 that they wanted to restore voting rights to felons. Sadly, over the next 4 years, rather than help our citizens understand Florida's complicated voter eligibility rules, Republicans instead resorted to intimidation and anti-democratic prosecutions. My fear is social media platforms could be used to confuse or intimidate voters. In those cases, why would we stop governments from sharing these legitimate concerns with such powerful, wholly unregulated companies? So, Mr. Seligman, could prohibiting communications between government officials and social media platforms further disenfranchise voters whose communities already face voter suppression? Briefly.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. We've seen the power of one individual like Rudy Giuliani encourage intimidation and violence against election workers. What would happen if social media platforms were amplifying those threats or triggering them?
They would become more severe.
Could you see a ban on such communication between government and social media platforms leading to increased violence against election workers, for example?
Absolutely.
The bottom line here is that this is a Hail Mary of a hearing designed to improperly influence the Supreme Court. And it puts two good men who saved many lives through a blizzard of baseless and distorted accusations and innuendo. Witnesses from the social media companies repeatedly confirm that nobody in the government ever coerced or threatened them to take action, but Chairman Jordan refuses to let the public see the transcripts or videos of their interviews. He's covering it up, which has been repeatedly obvious during this hearing, because for the first time in my 20-year career in Congress, I have never seen the majority not allow introduction by unanimous consent of information into the record for a committee hearing. That's what we should be investigating here today. And Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the full email chain dated March 4th, 2021, following up between Amazon employees and White House employees, which shows that Mr. Slavitt and Mr. Flaherty only asked for a meeting with Amazon to understand Amazon's policies, not make specific requests about content or censor any books. And I also ask unanimous consent to enter experts from the committee's April 16th, 2024 interview with the Amazon employee who received this email, in which the employee explains that that Amazon had been working on policies regarding vaccine-related books on Amazon for weeks before Mr. Slavitt's email.
Object. Objection being raised to the second part. Again,
okay,
I don't want to give a roadmap to other witnesses we plan on calling. We will release all that when we've complete our investigation.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, right.
I'll give you extra 10 seconds.
Okay, what we're trying to do is introduce into the record the email that ensures that we have an opportunity to...
We said fine to that.
Okay, and then the interview with the Amazon employee who received this email.
We're not going to release the transcript.
In which the employee explains that Amazon had been working on policies regarding vaccine-related books on Amazon for weeks before Mr. Slavitt's email. Those are connected. Those two things are important information to highlight the obvious evidence that what the two gentlemen
The time from the gentlelady has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky for his 5 minutes.
I yield back.
I yield to the gentleman from Ohio.
I appreciate the gentleman yielding. Professor, earlier, about an hour ago, Mr. Slavitt, in his, I'm reading from his written testimony, but I believe he said it in his oral testimony as well. He had this statement: to my knowledge, no one within the administration ever sought to make decisions for Facebook or any other social media company over their content moderation. Is that an accurate statement made by Mr. Slavitt?
That is not what I've seen in all the correspondence that I've reviewed.
You stand by that statement, Mr. Slavitt?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman.
So the administration never sought to make decisions for Facebook or any other social media platform over their content moderation?
To the best of my knowledge, certainly.
To the best of your knowledge, it's the third day. Clark Humphrey, who worked with you all right? Miss Humphrey worked with you guys? Is that Miss Humphrey worked with you?
Yes, that's accurate.
She sends an email, wanted to flag the below tweet, wondering if we can get moving on the process for having it removed ASAP. That's not trying to influence social media company over their content moderation?
I think the statement that I said was that we didn't choose to make decisions for social media companies. I didn't say that there weren't correspondence or weren't occasions when they weren't trying to influence social media companies. And I think social media companies did a admirable job telling us when they disagreed. And I think those were
What is it?
important public
Take down
dialogue.
this tweet ASAP. If that's not trying to make a decision for the social media company, what is it?
I don't think she was ordering them to take anything down.
Well-
And I don't know the context of the entire conversation, but if you have documents to
Can
share,
you keep
which
an eye
indicate
out
that,
for tweets in this same genre? What was that?
I wasn't a party to that email, so I don't know. what was
Is
intended.
that trying to impact the content moderation decisions at Facebook or at Twitter or any other social media platform?
I'm sorry, did you say, can I see the full email, please?
I'll read it to you. Wanted to flag the below tweet, wondering if we can get moving on the process for having it removed ASAP.
I'm not sure I know the context. I wasn't a party to the email.
I just don't see how your statement squares with the actions that your
Well, I
administration
think
took on day 3 with someone who worked in your worked with you guys.
I
How about this one?
Okay.
How about this one? Our YouTube trust and safety team is working to finalize a new policy to remove content that could mislead people on the safety and efficacy of vaccines. We would like to preview our policy proposal for you and get any feedback you have. So now they're asking on the front end, are you okay with the policy? Is that trying to impact and make decisions for social media companies about content moderation?
To make decisions? No.
They're trying to get an okay from you on the front end? And you're not having an impact on their social media platform content decisions?
As I interpret it, this was a interaction where a dialogue, and I don't know the entire context of the dialogue, but it
They're
sounds
asking
like the
permission.
social media company.
They want your feedback, and you've said,
It sounds like part of a dialogue about what constituted consistency with their policy. That's far different, in my opinion, Mr. Chairman, from someone making a decision on their behalf.
okay,
I don't know the
Mr.
occasion.
Flaherty, in your opening statement, you said something that I just found astounding. Twitter's new owner abandoned all its prior policies related to COVID misinformation over a year and a half ago. That decision was Twitter's to make, and I'm not aware of any adverse actions against Twitter in response to it.
Congressman, I'm not aware of any adverse government actions taken against Twitter in response to that change.
8 different federal agencies have went after Elon Musk and Twitter since that happened.
Congressman, I am no longer in government.
Department of Justice is looking into the fact that he hired too many Americans at SpaceX, FEC, SEC, FAA, NLRB, U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of North, and even the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service have went after him. And I haven't even got to the big one. FTC sent 12 letters, first letter asking right after the Twitter files, Mr. Musk, who are the journalists you're talking to? And you said in your opening, you said in your testimony that Twitter's new owner, I'm not aware of any adverse actions against Twitter in response to it. Literally, one of the most ridiculous things I've heard. Every agency you can imagine went after this guy because he's advocating for free speech in the First Amendment. You stand by your statement?
Congressman, I do stand by the statement. I can't.
And you weren't aware of any of that? You weren't aware that the FTC sent 12 letters, and the first letter said, we know you're talking to 4 journalists. 2 of them testified in front of this committee twice. And we want to know who else you're talking to. Asking someone, who are the journalists you're talking to? Direct attack on the First Amendment. And you say nothing's happened. No adverse actions against Twitter in response to what he's done.
Congressman, again, I'm here to speak about my experience in government and interacting with social media companies. I left the government in June of 2023. I can't speak to this, and I certainly
This happened before that. All right.
Reclaiming my time, these sound like mafia tactics when we send every 3-letter agency known to the U.S. government after Elon Musk when he comes out for free speech. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's been a very interesting hearing, to say the least. And it's important that I repeat again that what others have already said, the transcripts that are not being allowed by unanimous consent clearly confirmed that nobody from the government ever coerced or threatened anyone from the social media companies into taking action. It is a cover-up. And that's what the bottom line here is, that we are looking at what may have been misinformation, bad information, flat-out lies, we saw it happening all over during this time period. So, Mr. Slavic, I'm just going to ask you bluntly, did you ever try to force, coerce, or threaten any private company into taking specific action related to false information about vaccines or COVID at large during this time period?
No.
Mr. Flattery, same question.
I can't recall a time.
You can't recall?
Yep.
Okay. So did you ever try to force a non-government actor to work with you through threats or coercion?
Certainly not, Congresswoman.
So was it your impression that anyone or any company who worked with you did so voluntarily to try to do their part to address the pandemic?
Congresswoman, it is absolutely true that these companies get to make their own decisions. That is certainly not at the expense of folks in government, civil society, elsewhere to have an opinion about those decisions, but it's their policies and their enforcement.
Do you know there was ever any follow-up to see whether what they did or didn't do, and whether there was any adverse action if they didn't do what cleaning up the false or misleading information?
Congressman, when you say follow-up, by...
Well, they keep saying that there was adverse action. Adverse action means that, you know, they did or didn't do what you all asked them to do, if you did ask. So then an action was taken against them. So someone would have had to follow up to know, because as the Mr. Slick, the other witness, testified, he's not aware of any lawsuit, he's not aware of any fines, he's not aware of any adverse action that happened with on the part of any of these companies.
Congresswoman, I'm certainly not aware of adverse action that was taken.
All right, and Mr. Slavic, same for you. Did you ever try to force a non-government actor to work with you through threats or coercion?
No.
So was it your impression that anyone or any company who worked with you did so voluntarily to try to do their part to address the pandemic?
Yes.
And of course, both of you were doing all this to save lives, weren't you?
Yes. Yes.
And I can tell you that in my community, there was a lot of misinformation, some of them just flat out lies. I remember once visiting with some Spanish speaking members of my community, and they had seen a YouTube video that someone put out there telling Spanish-speaking women not to take the vaccine, not to get the shots, because they would become sterile and would not be able to have children. That's false, isn't it?
Yes.
It is false, because this was once in a century horror of a pandemic, unlike any other in our generation. As one ICU doctor put it, it was a war without bullets. You all were fighting a war. And this was especially felt in the communities of color, where Black and Latino individuals disproportionately became sick, were hospitalized, and died from this awful virus. In fact, Dr. Peter Hotis of Houston from the Baylor College of Medicine said to us and read from a board where they watched the deaths in Harris County, my home county, and he read, Hispanic male, Hispanic male, Hispanic male, Black male, Hispanic male, Black male, Hispanic male, Hispanic female, Black female, Black male, Hispanic, 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 and all the deaths that were occurring, over half, were directly impacting our minority communities. And he told us in a meeting that this virus has taken away a whole generation of mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters, you know, who are young kids, teenage kids, and it occurred to me that what we're seeing really is a historic decimation among the Hispanic community by the virus. So it was important to get the right information. And Mr. Chairman, I too have a unanimous consent request for admission of this document. Coronavirus is causing the historic decimation of Latinos, medical experts say.
Without objection. Time of the gentlelady has expired.
Thank you.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Slavitt, in this partisan free-for-all, I just want to say that I credit you. You've had some candidness in your responses so far, and I just want to explore that for a minute. I think maybe the First one, the chairman started with was the first claim was the claim that vaccinations would prevent COVID infection. And I think it's fair to say you acknowledge in hindsight that turns out not to have been true. I know it's been said over and over, Mr. Flaherty most often, that it was based on the best knowledge at the time. Am I fairly, you've acknowledged as much, correct?
So I believe it was true up until June of 2021, and then the Delta virus came, and that caused reinfections to occur differently.
Okay, so I would summarize that as saying that it was an evolving set of circumstances. I'm not even sure it was true in the inception, so I might have that difference with you. But does the fact that that situation was fluid and you might be wrong, and it's evolving quickly, doesn't that tend to prove to you that it's important for officials who are in power to give the First Amendment a wide berth, not to go out and make sure and impose an orthodoxy and try to cut off what other people are saying that might be different from that claim?
Yes.
Well, I appreciate that concession. I submit that, you started off with some principles that you said you were guided by like 3 principles. First, that the judgments of the platforms were strictly their domain. But then you said in number 2, you say, but their policies were not enough. You questioned them about how they were exercising those policies. I would submit to you that I think those are hopelessly contradictory. It's either their decision or it's yours. I certainly don't think there's any problem for the White House to go out in public and say what you think is the most important information. Or if a reporter asks you, well, you say that taking the vaccine is going to prevent getting COVID. Is that the case? Yes. Some people say otherwise. Well, we think they're wrong. I don't have a problem with that. But I am troubled that a person who seems to be relatively fair-minded would look at all the correspondence about where the Facebook people say we're under pressure from the White House and say, well, we weren't trying to pressure anybody. Or we don't look back in hindsight and feel like we don't understand how they could have perceived any pressure. Is that the position you're in? You don't think they could have perceived pressure from what was happening from the White House?
So I think a good characterization of my second principle, to keep it simple, is trust but verify. And if we are told that there are policies that are in place and we get reports that the evidence is otherwise, and we did receive third-party reports which caused us to question some of the claims that they made, I thought it was fair to ask them, hey, your policy is X. We're getting reports of Y. Can you explain to us?
Yeah, but I don't think they need to account to the White House for how they're operating their businesses, especially when their business is hosting a conversation of the American people. And the problem that's most disturbing to me about even the partisan warfare around this is that all these principles have been well established for a long time. Justice Brandeis in 1927 said the remedy for false speech or bad speech is more speech. It became famous. And even his concurrence then was in a case in which the Supreme Court, the liberals went further in Brandenburg in the late 60s and said they overruled Whitney, that case, because it was too restrictive. We got Republicans banning TikTok because the Chinese government's involved in a communication. Well, in 1965, in Lamont versus Postmaster General, the same Supreme Court established that Americans have a First Amendment right of access, Mr. Seligman, to information, even if it's foreign propaganda. How have we come to the point 40, 50 years later where we're fighting over these same issues? Aren't they? Do you not think are those principles that I talked about, Mr. Slavitt, are they important to you?
Those principles
that I just made reference to, those established things, and don't you credit them to liberals? I mean, there were liberals in the Supreme Court.
I don't know where I credit them, but I do agree. Look, I agree with your characterization that the social media companies did not need to account to the White House. I do think, though, during the pandemic, lots of us were trying to pull together, problem solve, and understand how to prevent people from dying.
But that doesn't really justify it. Just because circumstances are pressing, that's always the case with somebody in authority. Mr. Flaherty, I was listening. You're always anxious to credit what the other side has asked you, but you say you just don't know or you can't say. I'm just curious, what have you gone on to now? You're at the White House. What do you do now?
Congressman, I'm the deputy campaign manager for President Biden's reelection campaign.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from the Virgin Islands. The ranking member is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Seelig, the government has the right to engage with private speakers to inform, advocate, persuade, criticize, as long as government officials do not actually coerce those private speakers or threaten to take action against them if they don't do what the government wants. Is that a fair summation of the law on this point?
That's correct.
And are you aware that 45 Republican House members submitted an amicus brief in Murphy versus Missouri?
I am.
And are you aware that this brief repeatedly alleges that the federal government, quote, coerced social media companies into taking certain action?
I am, and I believe the brief does not substantiate that claim.
I've looked at the actual transcripts of interviews with social media companies and the transcripts that the majority has refused to not even, never mind release, but actually just allow into the record, also does not substantiate the claim by those individuals that signed on to this amicus brief. I don't know, are any of our witnesses lawyers? All right, Mr. Sawicki, are you familiar with the rules of professional responsibility, right? That all of us, as members of bars, must take as an oath, correct?
Yes.
And one of the rules of the professional responsibility is the rule of candor to a tribunal. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And broadly speaking, that rule requires attorneys who present information to a court to disclose all relevant factual evidence. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Even if the evidence is contrary to their argument?
That's my understanding, yes.
Right. You also cannot use false evidence. That's correct. Anyway, the witness after witness has straightforwardly said that the coercion, the witnesses in these transcripts that are not being released, repeatedly say that coercion did not happen. Let's take a look at what they actually said. In June 16, 2023 interview, the committee asked a YouTube employee, at any point when you were doing these collaborations with government agencies, was the government agency coercing YouTube in any way to participate in those relationships? The witness's unqualified one-word answer, no. The witness then said that YouTube's actions were voluntary and in line with YouTube's priorities. Mr. Seligman, do you agree that this is evidence that the government's engagement with YouTube was voluntary and not coercive?
Yes.
Are you aware that this testimony was not in the Republicans' brief?
Yes.
In June's 22nd, 2023 interview, the committee asked a Google employee whether any US government official ever threatened any Google employee with adverse actions if Google refused to take any particular action. The witness plainly stated that he was not aware of any such request. Do you agree that this is evidence, sir, that the government did not threaten Google into taking any actions?
Yes.
Are you aware that this testimony was not in the Republicans' brief?
I am.
And another Google employee was asked in a June 26, 2023 interview whether they had any information about collusion between the federal government and Google to censor speech. And the witness replied, in my experience, Google across its range of services through the years has consistently made its own independent decisions with regard to what policies, practices, or product development it designs. Mr. Seligman, do you agree that this is evidence that Google makes its own independent decisions without coercion by the government?
Yes, I do.
And are you aware that this testimony was not in the Republicans' brief?
Yes.
I can go do this as well with Meta vice presidents in June of 2023 interview, which wasn't in the brief, a May 16th interview with another Meta employee. When asked, to your knowledge, has anyone in the FBI or State Department or any other government agency ordered Meta to take down an account page or content? And his response to both was, not to my knowledge. What I've just read was just a small number of the universe of statements made by witness after witness stating that the allegations made by the majority does not hold water. And yet we are only hearing sometimes a portion of a sentence, not even the complete sentence, which would include the question, the can, as well as the punctuation point at the end, to recognize that it was a question and not a statement. When a party is made aware of evidence that is contrary to what they presented in court, do you think that that's something that they should share?
Gentleman respond.
Yes.
I yield back.
Time the gentlelady expired. The gentlelady from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Flaherty, what was your official title during your time at the Biden White House?
Congresswoman, when I was at the White House, I was assistant to the president and director of digital strategy.
And that is an appointed position, correct?
It is, Congresswoman.
Okay. Now, did you take an oath to the United States Constitution when you assumed this appointment?
Yes, Congresswoman.
Perfect. And you're familiar with the First Amendment?
I am.
Can you please outline the 5 tenets of the First Amendment for me?
Congresswoman, I'm not going to be able to do it off the top of my head, but generally the First Amendment relates to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, and off the top of my head, I'm not able to recall all of the planks.
Oof, well, that's disappointing and a little embarrassing, but not surprising considering what we're dealing with here today. Now, I certainly wouldn't expect that someone who cannot outline the basic tenets of the First Amendment to uphold the Constitution, of which you took an oath to defend, but here we are today. Now, you've said multiple times here that you cannot recall certain conversations, communications, correct?
Congresswoman, I left the White House almost a year ago. These discussions happened more than 2 years ago. Certainly there are a number of discussions related to this that I'm not able to recall.
Okay, so you agree that you have said multiple times here you cannot recall?
Congresswoman, yes.
Okay, just want to make sure. And I'm so glad that we have receipts, because we have come with receipts. In fact, all of your emails from that time. So we're going to help you recall some of these conversations. On February 6, 2021, at 9:45 p.m., we love our timestamps, you emailed Twitter to demand immediate removal of a parody or imposter account linked to Biden's adult daughter. You stated, quote, "Please remove this account immediately." Then you went on to say, "I have tried using your form 3 times and it won't work. It is also ridiculous that I need to upload my ID to a form to prove that I am an authorized representative of Finnegan Biden." Now, 2 minutes later, at 9:47 p.m., Twitter responded right back to you. "Thanks for sending this over. We'll escalate for further review from here." Mr. Flaherty, do you recall this exchange?
Congresswoman, I do recall that exchange.
Okay, so you still stand by how you have handled this situation in making it clear that you needed action immediately from a social media company?
Congresswoman, the White House Office of Digital Strategy absolutely has an equity in protecting the president's grandchild from online harassment and impersonation.
Sure, I would expect nothing less, but I'm just saying there's a common theme here, right? So you then escalated a little bit more, and within that same minute, so literally 60 seconds, cannot stress the degree to which this needs to be resolved immediately. 45 minutes later, at 10:32, Twitter responded, "Here's an update, the account is now suspended." Now, the next day, February 9th, you followed up with an email to Facebook with a demand for more information and an accusation that Facebook's failure to, quote, "censor speech on its platform is causing political violence." Those are your words. Causing political violence. Do you believe that the failure to censor Americans' First Amendment, constitutionally protected speech is considered political violence?
Congresswoman, I don't remember the specific email in question. I'm happy to take a look at it and observe the context, but I don't recall what you're referencing.
Well, and I will say I am disappointed because we have presented receipts here today, but we have also shown how timely you have been in engaging at all hours of the night with social media companies during your tenure as a representative to the highest levels of the White House. Again, your words, despite the fact that earlier my colleague, Representative Gates, was trying to clarify who is we that you speak of. You say in your emails that you represent the highest levels of government in the White House. But I find it ridiculous that it took us over a year for you to appear before this committee. In fact, it was after you actually missed your deposition, refused to show up. We had you scheduled in January and then again in February of this year, and you chose not to appear. Now, is it safe to assume that in your role as the deputy campaign manager for the Joe Biden reelection campaign, that you speak on behalf of the campaign or the President of the United States?
Congresswoman, I'm here to discuss my interactions with social media companies when I worked at the White House from January 2021 until June 2023. I'm not here to discuss the campaign.
But you're basically saying that you don't speak for President Joe Biden or his campaign, and you didn't speak for him during your time at the White House. So either you have completely misrepresented your role, or you are trying everything possible to make sure that your correspondence with social media companies directly threatening, coercing these companies to silence Americans who disagreed with the political agenda of the Biden administration happened.
Congresswoman, I'll note I'm here voluntarily to discuss my discussions with social media companies while I was in the White House, and I'm happy to answer those
Certainly, but
questions.
a year late and a dollar short. So with that,
Simon.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to be clear that the witness did appear to testify on the date that my colleague stated he did not come to testify. He was here, and the White House and this committee staff did not work out the terms of that interview. So I don't want it to appear that he has shirked his willingness to be a part of any hearing or any testimony or any interview by this.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are seeing a pattern here now, a year and a half into this Congress, and we see it with the impeachment investigation, and we are seeing it starkly here. Let's make a lot of really bold allegations and then try to weave in and mislead some evidence to justify them. It certainly happened in the impeachment, and it is happening here again, because in order to, quote, coerce or censor, then that means, A, whoever the private company that receives the communication from the government must feel coerced and act on that information, and B, they would not have done that but for the government intervention. And the problem that we continue to have with my Republican colleagues is they can get the first thing, but they never get the second. That is why evidence is important, and that's why we rely on evidence. So when colleagues over on the other side of the aisle talk about a TikTok ban, they are misrepresenting what the bill did. The bill required ByteDance to divest from TikTok, not to ban TikTok. And that is so consistent with all of the cherry picking of these emails that we have seen here today. I want to bring up another example, which was actually the focus of an entire hearing on this topic, but has not been mentioned once today. And that is the email from Clark Humphrey to Twitter related to Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s tweet about blaming Hank Aaron's death on the COVID vaccine. And this was the center of the Republican case up until today, and now we're moving on. And I wanna just stress why. Clark Humphrey wrote, wanted to flag the below tweet, and I'm wondering if we can get moving on the process for having it removed ASAP. Oh my goodness, coercion. That is censorship. It's some industrial complex. But you know what the problem was? It wasn't taken down. It wasn't taken down. Twitter received that email from the White House and did not act on it. Mr. Seligman, is there possible to have coercion when someone does not do what the other person asks?
No.
Now, we've heard a lot on the other side of the aisle. I think my friend Mr. Stubbe talked so much about March 2nd, all the emails to Amazon and trying to ban books. Well, we were not allowed to enter into the record some of the testimony from the employee who received those emails at Amazon, but I'm gonna go through this transcript because this employee was asked about that email. Even though you anticipated that you might be asked to remove content when you had a live conversation with Mr. Flaherty, you in fact were not asked to remove any content. Question? Answer, that's my recollection, yes. So I just want to be clear, to your knowledge, did anyone from the US government, including Mr. Flaherty or Mr. Slavitt, both of whom are witnesses here, ever coerce Amazon into removing content from its platforms? No. The answer, as the ranking member pointed out with so many other companies, was that they made their independent decisions what to do with the content based on information provided from public health experts like Mr. Slavitt and the CDC, and how that applies to their own policies. So you cannot have a First Amendment violation when a private company is making its own independent decisions, as every single company as part of this investigation did. So what is this all about? It's not actually about proving a First Amendment violation. What the Republicans want to do with this committee, because we've had hearing after hearing after hearing about some bogus First Amendment violation by private companies, is they want to chill the government from actually interacting with the private companies as we come upon an election in November of 2024. Russia interfered through social media in 2016. Russia tried to interfere in 2020, and you can bet Russia is trying to interfere in our election in 2024, and the only way that these social media companies can know that is by being provided with information from the United States government and their law enforcement investigations, and if that can't happen, then Donald Trump and these Republicans benefit because Russia will help them. That is why we're here, and that is why this is bogus. And I yield back.
Time of the gentleman expired. Gentleman from North Dakota is recognized. I appreciate the gentleman yielding. Chill the government? Oh my God, that's almost as crazy as what Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson said in the arguments in front of the Supreme Court when she said to the Solicitor General from Louisiana, "Counselor, your position has the First Amendment hamstringing the government." This is not about. This is not about. I know the gentleman from New York is sharper than that. I know that Professor Zawicki, Mr. Goldman.
Mr. Chair, you can only, someone has, as a point of order, time can only be yielded to you if the individual remains here during the person.
Yeah, you got to cite a rule, but we can also get Mr. Armstrong back if you're.
Then you should do that.
You're going to do that. Okay. But you need to cite the rule. If not, we'll proceed. When he comes back, we'll make sure he gets back.
Mr. Chairman, will you just yield quickly for a brief response?
It's my 5 minutes. No, it's my 5 minutes, and when I'm done with
so
5
you're going to
minutes-
attack me and not let me respond?
No, I said, I know you're smarter
said my
than that.
name.
I was complimenting the new.
You said my name, you
York.
said I know you're smarter than that, because I did not say anything about the First Amendment being used to chill the government. I said you in this committee are trying to chill government agencies. That's very different.
We're trying to protect the First Amendment. We're trying to protect the government from chilling American speech. Let the record show the gentleman from North Dakota has returned to his spot on the committee. Professor Zawicki, let's reference the email that Mr. Goldman brought up. And he said that the RFK Jr. tweet wasn't taken down. But I think this whole chilling effect is proven by this email, because there were 2 sentences. The first sentence said, "Wanted to flag the below tweet, and I'm wondering if we can get moving on the process for having it removed ASAP." So these guys, actually Ms. Humphrey, who works with them, said to Twitter, "Take this thing down. We don't like what RFK Jr., our political opponent, subsequent political opponents saying, take it down," right? And Mr. Goldman says, "Oh, no problem, they didn't take it down." But there's still a concern about chilling speech, right?
Exactly right, Mr. Chairman, and that's exactly what the problem here is there's this obsession with protecting the government's free speech rights, but we need to be worried about protecting people's rights. We need to be worried about protecting my rights. We need to be worried about people's rights to speak and to hear information that is relevant to their lives. And so if we're concerned about chilling speech, we should be concerned about chilling the speech of private citizens through the government overreach.
Now, I want to ask you about this. The next sentence. So, take down this tweet ASAP. Mr. Goldman says, "Oh, they didn't take it down." so there's no problem. But the next sentence says, and then, if you can keep an eye out for tweets that fall in this same genre, that would be great. That's the real chilling impact. Oh, we caught you, we don't like this tweet, we don't like what it conveys, take it down. They don't take it down, but now in the back of their mind, they're saying, oh, you know what? I better be on the lookout for anything else, or I'm gonna get another call, another email. Mr. Flaherty's gonna call me, Mr. Slavitt's gonna call me and say, what the heck are you doing? He's gonna be outraged, he's gonna pressure us, which all happened. So the second sentence is the chilling effect in that email. Is that right?
Yes.
This is just ridiculous. Oh, and let's go to the Amazon communications, because this was speech that was changed. This was content that was changed at the request of the guys in the Biden administration. The impetus for this request is criticism from the Biden administration about sensitive books we were given prominent placement to. So we're going to create a new do not promote class for anti-vax books. So they demoted these books. So a direct result of they said it themselves. The impetus, the catalyst for this is the guys at the White House. That's not just chilling, that's actual action taking place at the request of government to limit speech and who gets to see it.
And I would add, this isn't the government providing public information about issues of health. This is the government engaged in an ongoing secretive process that we've only discovered through discovery in that case and through the hard work of this committee subpoenaing these private actors, a secretive scheme to target named individuals for suppression for speech. And we don't even know if it's going on.
Yeah.
That is a big difference between the government expressing its opinion and targeting people secretly to remove their speech from the public forum.
Take down this tweet ASAP, the White House. And be on the lookout for any other thing in this genre.
Exactly.
That's a direct attack. That's as big a chilling impact as you can have on speech, coming from the office of the president, the White House itself. I appreciate the gentleman yield back the remainder.
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Gentlelady is recognized for.
I just want to clarify that it is Rule 9F that requires a member to be actually present in order to possess a 5-minute period of questioning.
Yeah,
So
I
in the
appreciate it.
future, if we can ensure that when members yield that they remain in the room, that would be helpful.
Great.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Texas.
Thank you so much. Boy, oh boy, what a welcome to this committee. Okay, so I want to start off with a quick little level set of a few things, because I believe in facts and not fiction. So I'm going to ask each of the witnesses if you can answer a simple question. Who won the 2020 election? Let's start right here.
Joe Biden.
Thank you.
Joe Biden.
Thank you.
Joe Biden.
Thank you.
Joe Biden.
Thank you. This is amazing. Unanimous. Joe Biden won in 2020. So when people start posting things like Joe Biden didn't win on social media, to the extent that as we're talking so much about polling, because we're headed into the 2024 election, we have so many people that don't believe that Joe Biden won the election, and most of them tend to be on the other side of the aisle. It is because there was misinformation and disinformation that was put out over and over on social media. Now, let me try to see if I can ask you another question and see what kind of answers we get. This one is a little trickier. Did the COVID rate of deaths decrease after the vaccines were released or increase after the vaccine was released?
Decrease.
Decrease.
I'd have to review the data, but are you just talking about the COVID rate of deaths or all excess mortality?
No, the COVID-related deaths.
I believe that the COVID-related deaths declined, but in the Delta period, I'm not sure. That's why I'm hesitating.
Thank you so much.
They declined.
They declined by approximately 90% in the first 6 months.
Well, I love that data right there. Thank you. Okay. All right, so here's the deal. I'm annoyed by this hearing because, number one, it is Groundhog's Day all over again. We have had some version of these hearings, and we've talked about misinformation, disinformation, and I do want to make sure that we understand what it means to have a First Amendment protection. So I am going to start over here. When we talk about the Constitution, for those that don't understand how it works, is it limitless and there's no restrictions to any of our constitutional rights?
No.
It's not limitless, is it?
No.
In fact, I know that my colleagues believe there's no limits to the Second Amendment, and it sounds like they believe there's no limits to the First Amendment, but I remember when Trump got banned from Twitter, and that probably saved the country. Nevertheless, it at least would have saved him some money, because right now he just got caught up in court for, never mind, we're not gonna talk about Truth Social right now, but there are limits on the First Amendment and what can be done. So number one, let's talk about who the actor has to be. The actor, when we're talking about the First Amendment, has to be the government, correct?
Correct.
All right, and if we're talking about actions of the government, which there's allegations of some nefarious thing that was going on behind the scenes where the government is really co-opting social media, and so therefore they are the government actors, can you talk about some of the things that are limited? Are acts of violence okay to limit under the First Amendment?
In certain circumstances, yes.
Okay. What about libel or slander?
Again, in certain circumstances, yes.
Okay, so flat out falsities that can potentially cause harm, they also could be limited too, huh?
That's correct.
Okay, all right, so now we know, even though we're talking about social media, which last time I checked is not run by the government, we know that First Amendment rights can be limited. But what is so interesting about this hearing is that basically what the Republicans are arguing for is carte blanche. We should be allowing anybody to say whatever, and that's how we get so much Russian propaganda. I was able to produce some that was spread by one of my colleagues in another hearing. This is the problem. This is why China is coming after America. This is why we see the Russians coming after America, because we have people that will continue to spread their lies, and in spreading their lies, they're causing harm to Americans instead of these people in this chamber doing what they are supposed to do, which is to protect the American people and use the Constitution, because not every country has a Constitution that protects the people. And so I would like that this party stop peddling Putin's lies and focus on making sure that we can put forth truth that we can all respect and understand. And with that, I will yield.
Yields. Gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized for 5 minutes.
Wow. I'd just like to read a headline from today. The CDC lied about COVID vaccine deaths, files show. So while I appreciate the hero complex of Mr. Flaherty and Mr. Slavitt, the fact is that we know that a lot of the information that was being peddled by this White House was untrue. We know that the CDC lied. We know that Anthony Fauci lied. We know that Mr. Biden lied. And you were pushing propaganda.
Would the gentleman yield
during
for a
much?
question?
No, I will not.
I'd love to know
my-
the source of your
This is my
citation.
time.
Yeah.
Mr. Flaherty, when you served in the executive office of the president, you were the assistant to the president and director of digital strategy. Is that correct?
Congressman, that's true. At the end of my service, I was
Okay.
promoted. In the
And I think it's fair to say that the position of President Biden was to get as many Americans to take the COVID vaccine as possible. Is that also true?
Congresswoman, I would agree with that characterization.
And yes or no, was your routine dialogue with social media companies part of a strategy to achieve this goal of the president?
Congressman, we engage with these social media
Please answer the
companies
question,
who
yes or no.
They had stated
Was
a
that the
goal.
purpose? Was that the purpose of engaging with the social media companies? Yes or no?
Congresswoman, the engagement with social media companies was certainly in service of
Thank you.
The work we
The
were
goal of getting people vaccinated, correct?
doing in the context of the president's efforts
Yes.
to vaccinate.
Was the strategy to engage with social media companies something that you or Mr. Slavitt came up with yourself, or was this directed by other White House personnel?
Congressman, could you define what you mean by the strategy?
what we just described, engaging, you've been testifying for several hours now, the strategy of engaging with social media companies in part to encourage the American people to take the vaccine. Was that a strategy that you and Mr. Slavitt came up with, or were you working with other people within the White House?
Congresswoman, certainly the effort to make sure as many people in America were vaccinated should not be
My
surprising.
question is, who came up with the strategy to work with social media companies to further that agenda?
Congresswoman.
Just you and Mr. Slavitt? Were you in an office one day and you decided, you know what we can do? We're going to come up with an idea that will work with social media companies to try to further this vaccination agenda.
Congresswoman, our office worked with social media companies to...
I'm not asking about working with the social media companies. Who else was involved in the White House making that decision?
Congressman, there were certainly a number of discussions about various elements of our
Did you
plan.
was President Biden or White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain or other senior White House officials aware of the fact that you were asking social media companies to demote or remove vaccine-related content?
Congresswoman, you know, again, we were across the
Were they aware of your activities? As demonstrated by the emails, were they aware of your activities? It's a simple question.
Congresswoman, I'm not authorized to discuss internal discussions within the White House.
Did you ever inform the social media companies that you were briefing President Biden, White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain, or any other senior White House officials?
Congresswoman, I don't recall specifics of who I was briefing when. It's been a couple of years.
So let's put up I have an email here. I'd like to direct your attention to this email, which specifically states that you were referring to, quote, it might help to consolidate this and the other recent conversation or convo your higher-ups had with Ron. Do you see that in that email?
Yes, Congresswoman, I do.
Who is Ron?
At the time, Ron Klain was the Chief of Staff at the White House.
All right. And so there were conversations that you had with Ron Klain about these activities that you were engaging in with the social media companies.
Congresswoman, I don't recall having a specific conversation with Ron about this.
You realize you're under oath, don't you, Mr. Flaherty?
Congresswoman,
Do you realize you're under oath? Do you realize that you've sworn to tell the truth?
Congresswoman, I agree.
My colleagues on the other side of the aisle state that there is no government censorship because these are private companies who can make their own decisions. If this is the case, then why did you think that reaching out to the companies about their content moderation policies was a productive use of your time?
Congresswoman, sorry, could you restate the question?
Yes. Why did you think that reaching out to these social media companies was a productive use of your time if you never had any influence with them?
Well, Congresswoman, certainly these social media companies had a set of policies that they stated.
Why did you care whether they enforced their policies? What difference did that make to you? Are you a part of the contract? Is it your responsibility to enforce policies of private companies?
Congresswoman, I think it's important to remember the fact that this is, you know, these kinds of engagements with people who publish information are standard across government.
You can try to gaslight us as much as you want to and try to act like your activities didn't have any influence. But one of the things I noticed, Mr. Flaherty, is that you use the F word an awful lot in your email correspondence with the social media companies for emphasis. We all know why you were doing it and why you use the F word in your emails to these companies. It was to emphasize the importance of them doing exactly what you were telling them to do. You violated the First Amendment rights of American citizens. You know that, and we know it too. With that, I yield back.
I disagree with that characterization.
Time of gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor, based on the information obtained by this committee, do you think that the email communications between the Biden White House and social media companies were coercive?
Absolutely, especially read in the context of everything that was going on, as I think was well described in the findings of fact in the district court in the Missouri versus Biden case.
When a senior White House official says to a social media company that the White House, quote, intentionally or internally, we have been considering our options on what to do about it, end quote, what sorts of adverse actions within the executive branch do you think that the social media company was most concerned about?
Well, it's pretty clear in some of the announcements they make, amending Section 230, the Communications Decency Act. They said in the same statement where they said they were concerned about what the social media companies are doing, they talked about changing antitrust enforcement. And we see this across the board. We see this with the pressure that's been put on banks and debanking operations. This is to debank people and silence speech. This is a systematic scheme to suppress the rights of individuals through government pressure.
Setting aside the obvious constitutional concerns of what's been happening, what are the practical consequences of this type of censorship or distorting the marketplace of ideas?
Well, it has concrete effects on our lives. How many parents would have changed their minds about the wisdom of keeping their kids out of school for a year and a half if they had understood what the Great Barrington Declaration said, which everybody says now that was a massive mistake. If people had accurate information about that, they might have changed their minds. If people had accurate information about the COVID vaccines, they might have changed their minds. A number of people who I talked to said, I got vaccinated because I was told it was one and done, and then only to get COVID shortly after. I want to make something very clear. As I cite in footnote 14 of my statement, the CDC knew in March, the CDC already knew not only were people getting COVID, people were dying from COVID if they were vaccinated. Hundreds of thousands of people were already getting COVID. That was in the leaked CDC slideshow. Anthony Fauci published an article a week after he left that we see cited in footnote 8, where he said we knew that these intramuscular vaccines can't prevent infection and transmission of COVID. And I'll say one last thing. What I heard today is silencing me was a triumph for these guys. Not because I said anything wrong, but because all they cared about was vaccine hesitancy. We heard them say we can suppress true information about side effects if that promotes vaccine hesitancy. It might not have even mattered whether or not I said anything about the science.
And as
merely
a result
me
of that,
saying that there was, you have a constitutional right.
Professor, real quick, I've got limited time.
I apologize.
So you yourself have been censored because of the actions of what was happening within the White House. Does it concern you that you would have been censored under a content moderation policy that YouTube wanted approved by the White House?
Yes, extremely.
Why do you think it's important that Congress and the American people know whether the White House was secretly pressuring big tech to censor American speech?
Because people have a right to know whether they're getting a true flow of information, and each of us have a right to know whether we are being targeted by the federal government for silencing and suppression.
Thank you. Mr. Flaherty and Mr. Slavitt, why won't the White House turn over your documents to Congress?
Congressman, can you say that again?
Why won't the White House turn over your documents to Congress? We've requested them.
Congressman, I would refer you to the White House counsel's office on that particular matter.
Well, I'm presuming that they're probably watching this hearing. So would you have any objections to your emails with the social media companies being released to this committee?
Congressman, I'd refer you to the White House counsel's office on this particular matter.
Well, you say that you've done nothing wrong, and you kind of come in here like the noble guy that has helped save America, and you have no regrets really about your actions. Is that correct?
It is correct that I don't regret, and I am proud of the actions.
Then there would be, logically, there would be no objection on your part for those emails, for your very purposeful duty at the White House to be released to this committee. Is that a problem?
I'm certainly proud of the actions the administration took to save lives, but I would refer you to the White House counsel's office
So
on
you
that
say
matter.
you did nothing wrong, but you don't want anyone to see what you said or did. That's kind of where we're at, I think.
Congressman, I'm here to answer
and I've got
questions.
limited time. I got 20 seconds. So here's the rub. The data changed. Things changed. You have decided that you were the arbiter of truth. Now, you were working with some experts. Other experts had different things. You wanted censorship on whether it was in a lab or not. Well, we now know, based on Director Ray's testimony, that that is actually kind of presumed. So you're assuming facts in reality, in real time, but you're not actually, but the things changed. And I'm going to wrap up here in a second. You're not a medical expert. You're not a medical expert, but you are asking
Gentleman's
social media
time's expired.
companies to wade in on that. And that's the problem, is that you have acted as
Gentleman's
the arbiter
time
of
has
truth
expired,
in a
Mr.
country that
Chairman.
adheres to civil liberties.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman may respond if you'd like.
Congressman, I don't recall any incident in which I was working on or said anything to social media companies about the theory that you mentioned. But again, our work in the White House was in service of understanding these policies and engaging with these companies as they enforce their own policies.
Gentleman yields back. I know you guys have been sitting there for 3 hours. We appreciate it. We just have 2 more to go, and then the committee will adjourn. So I'll recognize the ranking member for a second round of questions.
Thank you. I don't really have a round of questioning. I thought we were going to do just 2 minutes, or
2 minutes, whatever you want.
Yeah. But I just want to thank you all for being here, for saying what your beliefs are, your recollections, as you can recall them, were. I think it's interesting that we are discussing free speech, and yet this committee is censoring speech and giving the American people only a slice of information that they want them to see. And they're trying to use the guise of, we don't want our other witnesses to know what we're going to be questioning people on, is the excuse to why they won't give the American people the whole truth. They're going to say there's coercion, but there's evidence of no coercion. They don't want to put that forward. And they don't think that that's a problem. They don't see that there's an issue with that. That's absolutely insane. We've been doing this. You see some of these transcripts that I had were from 2023. They haven't been able to talk to the witnesses since then to be able to release that. They've only released 2 of these transcripts at this point. I got a stack of them here that are still waiting to be released. And they don't want to release them because this is all part of their scheme to keep the truth that there was not coercion going on with these social media companies. And they need these companies not to do their job now as we start into the 2024 presidential election. And when they talk about the discussion of White House with these media companies, I've got a transcript here from an interview with an Amazon employee where the question is, so just to be clear, it was during the Trump White House that Amazon and other tech companies were first asked to work on the issue of rooting out COVID misinformation? Answer, yes, that's my recollection. Because we were in a pandemic, and it was incumbent on our government, along with these social media companies, along with health experts, along with cable news, along with members of Congress who, if we can recall, voted for funding to support the vaccine, all working together to try and stop the deaths of Americans and people around the world. Did that information and what we knew about the vaccine change over time? Of course it did. I can recall when we were told you could only transmit it by hand to hand or by touch. We didn't even know it was airborne initially, and that changed. But the work of our government is important, and we don't want these social media companies chilled in their own rooting out of misinformation and disinformation, particularly from our adversaries, as we go into this next election. And so, Mr. Chairman, once again, for all things congressional, can we move on to another hearing to discuss some weaponizations of other areas? I've given you 2 or 3 other topics that we can talk about. In other committees, they will at least give a member of the minority 1 hearing at least on a topic that we can agree on, that is weaponization. Let's not continue the weaponization by Congress of social media companies. With that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Professor, does the First Amendment protect false speech?
Yes.
Yeah, you can say
Of course.
You're allowed to say stupid things, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard stupid things said today.
Democrats said the inflation.
Like nobody got infected till the Delta variant came.
Yeah,
I mean, he's got an absolute right to say that.
But in this case, they were trying to censor things that were actually accurate and true.
Exactly. Towards the end of preventing vaccine hesitancy, they were censoring true speech.
True speech, which is even scarier. So that is complete disinformation. We are doing something we know not to be accurate. We're gonna take that is disinformation from our government, from the highest office in our government, in the executive branch, the presidency. That's the scary part. And as you rightly pointed out when you were your response to Mr. Fry, There are real world consequences. Kids didn't go to school. People didn't go to, Americans weren't allowed to go to church in certain time. Maybe didn't go to school, didn't go to work, didn't go to church. The implications were huge. And again, the First Amendment protects false speech, but in this case, it was accurate speech, and they were going after that. Now, there's some things that were, okay, that's probably not accurate. Okay, but that's not what happened here totally.
Right.
And that's the scary part.
I mean, there were people who didn't get vaccinated because the government told them if they wore a mask, they wouldn't get infected. It's like just a parade of these things to change people's behavior.
We asked Dr. Fauci in a deposition, where'd the 6-foot social distancing concept come from? And he said he couldn't tell us. I mean, the smartest man in the world couldn't tell us where the 6 feet social distancing thing came from. Go figure, right? Mr. Flaherty, is the White House still asking for content to be taken down?
Congressman, I haven't worked at the White House in quite some time, so I can't speak to their current practices.
Are you talking with social media now?
Congressman, in my current role, I have a sort of wide set of responsibilities, and so.
Is that a yes or a no?
Congressman, my
Beyond
current.
the scope of the hearing and the agreement that was reached between the White House and this committee.
Excuse me? Yeah, it's my time. Mr. Flaherty, the question is, are you currently talking with social media companies?
Congressman, again.
Outside of the scope of this hearing. This was an agreement by his attorneys and your staff that
Okay.
you would not be discussing the campaign.
Okay, I'll go back to the other subject then. All right. Well, I'll leave it there. I want to thank our witnesses for coming. Mr. Zeelman, we appreciate it. Professor, Mr. Flaherty, Mr. Slavitt, we appreciate you all being here today. And just, I guess, underscore the First Amendment, 5 liberties in the First Amendment. Your right to practice your faith, your right to assemble, your right to petition the government, free press, free speech, are the most important liberties we have. And the Biden White House was clearly trying to censor the most important of those 5. The most important of those 5 is the last one. Your right to speak, your right to talk, because if you can't speak and you can't talk, you can't practice your faith, you can't share your faith, you can't petition your government, and you don't have a free press. And that's what they were going after. And this is not, what was the statements earlier? I forget what they said. The cost of this, First Amendment doesn't have a price tag on it. I would argue it's the most important thing we have. What distinguishes Western culture from authoritarian cultures, and we need to respect that, and that's what we're doing. So with that, we'll adjourn the hearing. We thank again our witnesses for being here.
Young man, as counsel.